Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 781. Reason. A tense silence continued to press upon the air, unyielding, even as the turmoil had seemingly settled. The beast of burden galloped forward, its strides measured and heavy, each hoofbeat echoing against the cold earth. They were closer to the forest's edge than ever before. The boundary loomed ahead, no longer a distant threshold but an inevitability, waiting to be breached by the relentless pace of their powerful mount and the clawing light of twilight rising subtly beyond the horizon. Northern, however, gave no heed to the quiet beauty unraveling before them. His arms rested behind his head, eyes closed, his entire posture exuding an air of disinterest, seemingly frustrated. But his frustration ran deeper than what had transpired with the travelers, deeper than Roma's hesitant, uncertain gaze upon him. Even after noticing him, Roma had hesitated to approach, lingering in her indecision. She spent long, silent minutes debating with herself, weaving together unnecessary justifications. Why she should, why it didn't matter, why it was simply a conversation and nothing more. Eventually, she relented. She stepped forward, her movements deliberate yet cautious, and settled gently onto the nearest crate. Close but not too close. Northern's eyelids flickered open briefly, his gaze grazing over her before shutting once more, dismissing her presence. The girl sat in silence for a while, her fingers laced together, the weight of unspoken words pressing against her tongue. Then, hesitantly, she asked, "So, how did the battle go? Are you, okay?" Her words met only the cold embrace of silence. The emptiness stretched between them, dragging long enough for her to second-guess her decision. She was about to pull away when his voice finally rolled forward. Steady, even, detached. "Yes, I'm fine. Can't say the same for the damn monster, though." A pause. Brief. Then, the faintest sound of lips smacking together, as if tasting an unfinished thought. But it got away. The revelation caught Roma off guard, her eyes widening. Wow, it must have been a really strong creature. Then, Northern's brows furrowed slightly as he opened his eyes, pinning her with a look. "Indeed it was, but in the end it fell. However, I failed to kill it. I'm not sure where, but the bastard must be hiding somewhere." She shifted slightly, observing him. "Don't beat yourself up over it," she said softly. "I'm sure the monster's barely surviving, and who knows, there might be a better opportunity to end things." Her words hovered between them, unsure of their effect. His expression remained unreadable, impassive as ever. She couldn't tell if her reassurance had reached him at all, or if it had simply been swallowed by the same silence that lingered before. That same silence stretched once more, awkward and unmoving, before Northern finally spoke again. "How long before we get to our destination?" Roma swiftly unfastened the small leather pouch at her waist, pulling out a neatly folded map. With a practiced motion, she rolled it open, her gaze sharpening as she scanned the details. She studied it for a few moments, her brows slightly furrowed, before speaking in an even tone. "Once we leave the forest, Lithia should be just a few hours away." Northern exhaled a slow breath, nodding absently before closing his eyes again. A moment passed. Roma glanced at him, hesitant. Even with his eyes closed, he could feel her gaze, piercing, pricking, like an invisible needle pressing against his skin. His sigh came tired, measured. Without opening his eyes, he spoke. "If you have something to say, I'd rather you say it than keep stabbing me with your eyes." She flinched slightly, her fingers twitching against the edges of the map. Her gaze wavered, darting away briefly before settling back on him. Steady this time. I was just curious. She hesitated, her words catching in her throat for a second before finally pushing them out. Why are you here? Her voice was quieter now. I mean, why are you going to Lithia? Northern's eyelids parted, his gaze distant, drifting, like a man lost in thought even as the present called to him. Why was he here? Why had he left the contest to a simple clone? Why had he volunteered to venture into a blockade despite the warnings, the very clear warnings, from the shopkeeper? That question led him back, unearthing a memory he had mulled over more than once. The day he left the academy, the argument between Elina and her father. He had thought about it a few times already, about the wounds they bore when they returned. Elina, she could still be a forge master. Her hands were intact. But her father, the head forge master? His craft was lost. The damage was irreparable. He might still instruct others, guide them with knowledge, but the forge would never feel the weight of his hammer again. It was a tragedy, really. Elina had spoken of the dangers, the risks of sending students beyond the academy's gates. She had insisted that no one was acknowledging the severity of the threat, that they were blind to it. Her father hadn't denied it, which meant she was right. And then, the shopkeeper had echoed the same words. The blockade, its silence, its stagnation, the eerie absence of national concern. It all felt wrong. No nation suddenly seemed to care about what was happening. Trade routes were strangled, yet only merchants, not kings, not nobles, were taking action. But even then, there was only so much merchants could do. All these fragments, Elina's warning, her father's silence, the shopkeeper's words, coalesced into something undeniable. Northern's curiosity had been sparked. This so-called blockade, he wanted to see it for himself. He wanted to understand what exactly was blocking the trade routes, what dangers lurked beneath the surface, and why no one with power seemed to be truly addressing it. And yet, it wasn't just that. Delivering these crates safely to Lithia would also earn him the goodwill of a self-proclaimed information broker. Someone with connections. Someone who knew people in many places. There were advantages to this voyage. And it did not come at the sacrifice of his ultimate goal, the Milwa event. After all, his clone was handling that. Even now, though, chaos must have erupted within the Academy's authority. He had cleared a rift in minutes. A rift that should have taken weeks. The news wouldn't just shake the Academy, it would shatter the world. How would people perceive it? Some would be in awe. Others would call it impossible. Many were bound to dismiss it as an exaggeration. But the truth would ripple through the cracks. And soon, the world would have no choice but to see it for what it truly was. Chapter 782, Lurking Dangers. But none of that truly concerned him. The point was simple: this event, this feat, would carve a reputation for him. One so undeniable that overtaking the student council would be easier than ever. A sage, terrifying and dangerous, standing at the helm of the Academy's highest student authority. What greater honor was there? But he wasn't naive. This revelation, this monumental shift, would ripple outward, stirring reactions he could not yet predict. And yet, in the grander scheme of things, everything still existed within his control. And why go through all the trouble? Just a kind gesture for the man who sent me into a hellscape. That was all. He wanted to stand atop everything Ruffsburg had built, to be the first face the man saw upon his return. It was just a kind gesture, poetic one. And yet, this was more important than even that, which was why he chose to go for it. And so far, the journey has proven to be far more interesting than expected. Perhaps, by its end, he would find something different. Something he had never possessed before. Something that would begin to change him. A sigh finally slipped past his lips as he turned his gaze toward the girl. Why else? He mused, his voice calm yet weighted. To find passion. Roma jolted slightly. Her mind yanked back to the words they had exchanged on the day the mercenaries died. Her breath hitched. She lowered her head, heat rising to her face, covering it in quiet embarrassment. Northern's voice crawled out again, measured, even. What about you? She tensed. Of all people, You should be the last person on this voyage. His gaze sharpened. And then there's the fact that you were sneaking around the departure site the day before. A pause. So you're definitely up to something. His eyes bore into her, unabated. What is your reason for going to Lithia, despite the dangers it holds? She was silent for a few moments, her fingers tracing slow, absent-minded circles over the wooden crates beneath her. Then, softly, her voice slipped through the still air, graceful, deliberate. Do you know what's in these crates? Northern's gaze flicked in her direction, then toward the crates she sat upon, before dismissing both with a glance away. Don't know. Don't care. Roma let out a soft smile, her expression unreadable. It's amazing how you can afford nonchalance, she murmured. People like us, we're not granted such a luxury. Northern raised a brow. People like us? He echoed, his tone edged with curiosity. What category of people am I supposed to belong to? Roma closed her eyes for a brief moment, inhaling as if steadying herself. When they reopened, they held something different, an unwavering, strange resolve. I want to be more honest with you, she said. There's a secret I've been. Before she could finish, the ground lurched beneath them. A deep, guttural tremor rumbled through the earth, so massive that even the beast of burden vibrated beneath their feet. Northern shot up, his entire posture shifting in an instant. His gaze snapped forward, sharp and assessing. The silence that had rested over the caravan shattered. All around them, travelers stirred. Some rising, others glancing about with wary expressions, uncertainty flickering through their eyes. Roma moved beside Northern, scanning the area, her shoulders tensed. But no matter how much she looked, there was nothing. Nothing she could see, at least. Yet Northern remained focused, his narrowed eyes slicing through the distance, as if perceiving something beyond her comprehension. She frowned, narrowing her own gaze, trying to force her sight deeper into the dim horizon. But in the end she gave up. Turning toward him, she asked, "What caused the tremors? Are you seeing something?" Northern didn't answer immediately. Instead, he knelt, pressing his hand against the beast of burden's thick hide. The response was immediate. The creature's muscles coiled beneath his palm, its hooves hammering the ground faster. Its speed surged, not enough to rival a true speed-based mount, not even close to a horse from the mundane world before this one, but it meant something. Roma stirred uneasily, her frown deepening. "Hey, Rian, Ivu." Northern stood abruptly, arms folding across his chest. He looked at her, and in that instant, her words died in her throat, retreating with a sudden swallow. Then his gaze swept past her, toward the rest of the travelers. "Something big is coming." As if answering his words, the tremor struck again, this time stronger. The entire caravan shook. A ripple of fear spread through the group, faces paling, hands gripping whatever they could for balance. Roma's voice was tight when she spoke again. "When you say something," her breath hitched. "What exactly are we talking about?" She swallowed. "What kind of monster?" Northern stretched both arms overhead, his muscles flexing as he twisted his torso sideways, easing the tension from his body. Then, with a glance at Roma, he offered a small, knowing smile. "It's quite a big one," he mused, his tone almost casual. "Not as dangerous as the last. So I'll go take care of it." He paused. For a moment, his gaze drifted, unfocused. Something flickered in his expression, subtle yet telling. Then, a frown creased his features. His attention snapped toward the travelers. "Is the influx of monsters usually this insane?" The woman among the drifters responded first, her voice steady, measured. "Not usually, Sir Sage. In fact, things were far more subdued in this area, until recently." Her eyes darkened with memory. "We started noticing something strange. Monsters moving in the same direction. Then one day, a horde overran our town." She exhaled, the weight of loss pressing into her words. "We lost the thousands. And the rest of us, we lost them to the shadow storm." Northern's gaze lingered on her, studying her closely. A beat of silence passed before he spoke. So that means... His voice trailed, but his conviction didn't. Something is definitely wrong. Yes, sir. The voice that followed belonged to the tattooed drifter. He nodded grimly before continuing, his hands moving expressively as he spoke. Usually, field monsters are aggressive but disorganized. They lack the coordination monsters exhibit inside a rift. He shook his head. Different species of monsters shouldn't be moving together. It goes against every instinct they have. I've never seen it happen before. Not like this. Northern studied him. The man's words carried certainty, but more than that, they carried fear. Not the kind that clouded judgment, but the kind that came from witnessing something unnatural. As he listened, Northern's fingers drifted to his chin. His touch slow, deliberate. A sage's grace. A warrior's contemplation. And in the silence that followed, the weight of an undeniable truth settled over them all. Something was coming. Something far worse than just a stray monster. Chapter 783. The Blockade. As the massive beast of burden rumbled across the open expanse, carving a path beside the wide river, Northern soared overhead, scanning the terrain for potential dangers. He wasn't disappointed. As he had suspected, threats lurked in every direction. However, none of them seemed eager to make the first move. The beast of burden was in constant motion, and the predators watching from the shadows did not appear to be in a hurry to rend their flesh. The immediate danger had already been dealt with, a catastrophic maelstrom, an entity so massive it could rival mountains, had lumbered toward them. Half of its grotesque form was encased in writhing tentacles, which propelled it forward with unnatural speed. It hadn't posed much of a challenge. With a brief exchange of strikes, and using echo sparingly, Northern had erased the creature into nothingness. More good news. His summons had finally cleared the 20th floor guardian and retreated to the limitless void. The battle had taken a heavy toll, especially on the humans. Continuing further would have been suicide, or so Byran had described it. Only the 20th floor, yet all of his void summons had been left utterly drained. The realization of the dungeon's true depth and power was beginning to dawn on Northern. More than ever, he wanted to uncover its secrets. But despite combing through the vast archives during his brief stay at the library, he had found nothing on its origins. The only relevant information was tied to the history of the academy itself, the vision of Milwa, who had sought to create a safe haven for drifters, a sanctuary where they could cultivate their strength and push the limits of their potential through unity and cooperation. Milwa had involved 2 of his friends in the endeavor. But history was silent on one of them. His records had been erased. The only name that remained was Professor Heimberger. Strangely, none of the books explicitly linked Heimberger to Milwa. Yet, Annette and the entire academy just knew. It wasn't an openly discussed fact, nor was it ever acknowledged outright. It was an unspoken truth that everyone carried but never voiced. And the question that lingered in the minds of many was, how was Heimberger still alive? Among the 3, he had been the only mundane human. By all logic, he should have perished long ago. Perhaps the truth was only known to a select few. But Northern had a gut feeling, one he couldn't quite justify yet, that Professor Heimberger's seemingly unnatural longevity was intricately tied to the existence of the dungeon itself. And where knowledge was buried, Northern was determined to dig. However, all of that would have to wait. The academy, the student council presidency, the pursuit of hidden truths. For now, he had surveillance to conduct. As Roma and the cohort of travelers pressed forward atop the beast of burden, Northern dominated the skies, serving as their aerial scout. Hovering above, he kept a watchful eye on the monsters lurking in the forest's depths, and the creatures prowling along the far edges of the open expanse. From his vantage point, he spotted something unusual. A dot on the horizon, large enough to fill the center island nestled between the river's parting currents. The river split around the landmass, flowing on either side like a natural barrier, enclosing it within a seeming sanctuary. At its heart, tall brick walls loomed, fortifying the settlement. The defenses were taller on the riverside, where the threat of an assault from the water seemed more imminent. A seaport stood at the river's edge. But something was wrong. The ports were empty, the ships gone. Not a single vessel remained. Northern narrowed his gaze. Activating Chaos Eyes, he pushed his vision beyond the constraints of distance. And then he saw it. The ships had been dragged beneath the river's surface. Their shattered hulls lay submerged in the deeper waters, now a graveyard of wreckage. Abominations circled the ruins. The water rippled, not in one place, but across countless points. A disturbance too vast to ignore. All of a sudden, Northern pivoted midair and descended swiftly, landing on the broad back of the beast of burden. A small frown creased his face. Roma, noticing the change in his demeanor, studied him for a few moments before speaking, her voice hesitant, cautious. "What's wrong?" There was a weight in the air, a gravity that pressed down on them. Her tone instinctively matched the severity of his expression. Northern lingered in silence, his gaze distant, as if threading together fragmented thoughts. Then, after a few beats, he finally turned to her, his eyes narrowing. "I think I might have figured out what the blockade is." His voice carried the unmistakable weight of revelation. "Roma Stipend, what do you think it's about?" Northern didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned his attention outward, sweeping a slow, deliberate gaze across their surroundings. Then he pointed toward the dense line of trees. "Monsters in that direction." He shifted, gesturing behind them. "Monsters in that direction." Finally, his eyes settled on the river. "Even the waters are filled with them." A shadow fell across his face. "Lithia is trapped in the middle of it all." The words settled into the air like a cold weight, sinking deep into Roma's chest. Her breath hitched, and her eyes slowly widened as realization dawned. "Oh my stars! The blockade! It's monsters!" Her voice was almost a whisper, tinged with disbelief. "I thought it was something much more mundane, like the river itself. I suspected the harsh winter winds, maybe an impassable snowstorm. But as we crossed the forest and I saw no sign of a blizzard, I became confused. I failed to see what was right in front of me. The monsters." Northern studied her and nodded. "It's understandable. Anyone would have thought the same." His gaze held steady. "But consider something, what if I wasn't here? Would it have been possible to reach Lithia at all?" Roma fell silent. It was a fair question. In another context it might have sounded arrogant. But with the sheer gravity of the moment, the stark truth behind his words was undeniable. Roma's response was measured, her voice even. "No, I don't think so." Northern nodded. "And that's the most terrifying part." His gaze darkened. "Entering or exiting this blockade should have been impossible. To be honest, I'm different, even among drifters." He exhaled sharply, eyes flickering with reflection. "And still, I ran into monsters that were unnervingly difficult to deal with. I can't guarantee that any other sage would have survived this. I'm just built differently." He paused. Roma's expression shifted, and Northern caught the look in her eyes. Clearing his throat, he added quickly, "This isn't me boasting. It's just the blunt, unfiltered truth." Another pause. A sigh. "Everything is coming together. The strange behavior of the monsters. The way they lurk at the edges, barely attacking. It's too calculated." His voice lowered. "This is deliberate." Roma's frown deepened, her features tightening. "What? That's insane. You're saying this is intentional? That someone out there, has the power to control this many monsters and make them act in unison? That's impossible." A tremor ran through her frame, disbelief weighing her down. The sheer scale of it, the implications, it was too much to process. Even for the drifters. A feminine voice cut in. "The lady is right. Such a thing shouldn't be possible. No one has ever heard of monsters being controlled like this." Northern turned his gaze to them, expression unreadable. Then, with an indifferent shrug, he simply said, "We live in a world where the concept of impossibility is fragile. I myself am proof of that fragility. His eyes drifted forward. Arms folding across his chest, he fell silent. But in his mind, the pieces were beginning to align. And the answer was disturbing. Somehow, all of this tied back to the revolting government. And no matter how much he tried to suppress it, one name kept clawing its way into his thoughts. That damn lieutenant, just what exactly is he up to? Chapter 784. The Bridge. After the rift with Lieutenant Dante as a member of the Therian Citadel, Northern was mandated to document everything, the rift, its monsters, and his personal experiences within it. The Citadel offered special incentives for privileged information, particularly regarding the talents of others. And considering who they had coincidentally entered the rift with, Thalen had made those incentives particularly spicy. That was when Northern made an unexpected discovery. He had a surprising love for spicy food. But this wasn't about spice. Or food. Without hesitation, he disclosed everything he had learned about the military personnel he had encountered in the rift. Shortly after, a conversation had transpired between him and Thalen, the Citadel headmaster. And Thalen had a very particular suspicion. Lieutenant Dante was up to something devious. Shin and the others had also shared their experiences from the governor's mansion. Lieutenant Dante had attacked Arcadia. Though he hadn't reduced the city to rubble, he had killed the governor and his daughter, the last surviving members of their family. The battle had left more than half the city in ruins. Even days later, as Northern and the entourage of the Therian Citadel departed, the earth beneath Arcadia still trembled, a lingering echo of the destruction that had been unleashed. And so, Northern had kept it in the back of his mind, the uneasy suspicion that Lieutenant Dante was plotting something. Yet, no matter how much he tried to piece it together, the linchpin that connected everything, the lieutenant's true intentions, his single wish in exchange for granting Northern 3, eluded him. Dante had claimed he merely wanted friendly terms. But after traveling through the rift together, Northern found it hard to believe. But then, perhaps he was just being paranoid. Perhaps the lieutenant truly did not wish to cross paths with him again, not after witnessing his strength firsthand. Which is a good thing, since I don't want to either. That was the last of his thoughts on the matter, until Elina returned, missing a leg, speaking in fragmented words about something stirring in the Central Plains. It should have been none of his business. But his curiosity and his care for Elina got the best of him. He wanted to know, to understand what exactly was wrong, and why Elina believed the students were in danger because of it. So he made a decision. He would investigate the blockade himself. And now, here he was, standing amidst the results of his investigation. The shopkeeper had promised to tell him more, even offering his friendship to Northern. But instead, he had sent Northern into a place where entry and exit were impossible. Without a doubt, he had expected Northern to fail. A quiet chuckle escaped Northern's lips. Oh, he's going to be more than just a friend. That guy is doomed. Putting that aside, Northern analyzed the situation. From what he observed, the blockade posed no immediate danger to the students. The true focus seemed to be Lithia, and for some reason it was entirely centered around the city's role as a trade hub. Lithia was the second largest distribution channel, making it a vital artery for commerce. The first, Riamgard. But surrounding an empire like Riamgard with monsters was a pointless endeavor. They likely had more than enough powerful forces to dismantle such a blockade with ease. Which meant whoever was behind this had deliberately chosen Lithia instead. But what gnawed at Northern the most was how exactly they were managing to pull this off. And more importantly, why were other nations turning a blind eye to this? Even though this blockade was subtly affecting their lower markets, there had been no intervention. The entire situation felt disjointed, a mess of scattered intentions. Chaotic, disorganized, but deliberate. Yet Northern knew for sure that he was on the right track. At the very least, the students were exempt from immediate danger. Once the event was over, they would board their airships and safely return to the academy. That was one less concern. But another problem lingered. It was a nagging thought, buried deep but refusing to fade. Something about the hijackers, and that strange man Black Mamba had found on the secluded island. It was unrelated to the blockade, at least on the surface. Yet, the sheer existence of the question itself bothered the hell out of him. There were no immediate answers. But Northern knew. Where there were questions, there was always a trail, and he intended to find it. Finally, they neared the bridge, the only connection between the open expanse and the small island nestled within the river's parting currents. The bridge itself was a colossal structure, built and reinforced with rift-bred metals, strong enough to withstand most threats. Not just any monster could break through it, but maybe something as gigantic as the creature Northern had just erased might have. Thankfully, there were no signs of such an abomination. For now they were safe. The only immediate threat came from the monsters swarming below, their twisted forms desperately clawing at the bridge, trying to force their way up. But that was no issue. It was easy to fight them from above. Northern scanned their surroundings, his sharp gaze sweeping over the landscape. Everything appeared to be going well. But there was one problem. The beast of burden could not climb the bridge with them. Its massive weight would strain the structure, and Northern wasn't entirely sure it could hold. So, as they reached the bridge's entrance, everyone dismounted. Northern patted the creature's broad, sturdy back. "Thanks, buddy. You've been very helpful." The beast of burden let out a deep, resonant growl before retreating into the limitless void, along with the crates it carried. Roma's gaze lingered, not on the beast, but on the crates. She stared at them as the creature seductively strode into the small rift, releasing a low, creeping growl. Northern noticed. His voice was even unreadable. "Do you have an attachment to those crates?" His piercing eyes locked onto her. "I remember you asking about their contents." Roma's reaction was immediate, a sudden, involuntary shudder. Northern's frown deepened. She shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, her eyes dropping to the ground. His stare sharpened. "You know what they are, don't you?" The purple liquid in those bottles, you know what it is." Roma's entire body tensed. She took an instinctive step back, her eyes widening. "You checked it?" Northern's gaze flicked briefly toward the drifters ahead, watching as they ascended the bridge, helping the pregnant woman and the elderly man up the stairs. Then his eyes returned to Roma. He shrugged. "Nothing is truly hidden from my eyes." Lifting a hand, he gestured to his resplendent blue irises. "I can see all things." Roma studied him, her expression laced with confusion. But after a moment, she accepted his words. There were too many things about him that didn't make sense. Why should this be any different? Sighing, she ran a hand through her hair before speaking. "The items in those crates are extremely dangerous materials." Her gaze shifted toward Lithia, now barely visible in the distance. "But seeing the state of the city, I can understand why they need it." She turned back to Northern, parting her lips to continue. However, she never got the chance. A terrible tremor ripped through the earth. The ground shuddered violently beneath them. Northern's expression hardened. His head snapped toward the forest facing them. Something was moving. A large portion of the forest, no, a massive section, was slowly rising. The towering trees began to unfold, their shapes shifting, separating, differentiating. Northern's mouth fell open. So did Roma's. And so did everyone else's. Chapter 785. The Forest Turtle, Part 1. Northern paled as the snow-laden forest unfurled beneath him, revealing a hidden terror. His pupils dilated, trembling with shock. There had been a monster here all along? But why hadn't it moved before now? Of all times, why now? There was an eerie pattern to the way these creatures had been emerging. Everything that had gone wrong seemed as though it had been waiting, biding its time, until the moment they came. A wicked, unreasonable premonition crept through Northern's mind. But this wasn't the time to dwell on it. The creature loomed before them, massive and imposing, stepping forward with slow, deliberate force. It resembled a giant turtle, if a turtle could stand on two legs, hunched slightly like a grotesque mockery of human posture. Its body bore the texture of knotted wood and gnarled bark, its form seamlessly blending with the forest as though it had grown out of the very trees themselves. No wonder its camouflage had gone unnoticed, even by those who claimed they could see all things. Its eyes were black pools, devoid of light, yet brimming with unhurried malice. A presence that did not just threaten destruction, it assured it. The earth quaked with each step. As it advanced, its massive arms spread outward, shattering trees with ease, using them as leverage to tear itself free from the forest's embrace. It was colossal, unlike anything he had ever faced before. The last towering creature he had encountered, an enormous dummy, was nothing compared to this. That had been merely big. But this one, there was something in its dark, abyssal eyes, something subtle, something that made Northern's unease coil deeper into his gut. Immediately, Northern snapped his head back, his voice slicing through the frozen stillness of the travelers who stood paralyzed, watching the horror unfold. "What the hell are you doing? Run!" They trembled at the sheer force of his hoarse, commanding voice. "Run! Cross the bridge!" Only then did they break free from their shock, dragging their trembling bodies up the bridge's stairs in frantic desperation. Northern's gaze flicked to Roma, who stood unmoving, a contemplative look shadowing her face. "You too." She hesitated, biting her lips. In that moment, the forest turtle shifted, and from beneath its enormous feet, smaller creatures gushed out in a twisted, almost artistic cascade. Fluid yet grotesque. They ran with unnatural speed, their movements jagged and unpredictable, closing in on the bridge far faster than their towering progenitor. Northern's expression darkened. He turned back to Roma. "Don't mind what you see. I'm more than enough to take care of all this." She didn't respond, but the strange look on her face didn't escape him. With a sigh, Northern turned forward, and in an instant one clone appeared. Then another, and another, until a line of Northerns stood before the bridge, shoulder to shoulder, their presence like an unyielding wall. Roma's face turned bone-white. What in the stars? She couldn't even suppress her shock. Not that she tried. A deep, consuming chill spread through her body as the scene unfolded before her eyes. Clones? She had seen Northern wield ice. She had seen him summon fire. She had seen him fly. She had even seen him tear rifts into the air. What exactly is this guy? Who is he? There's no way this is just a sage. Is a sage even supposed to be this strong? Her mind was a storm of questions, and for a moment, she simply froze, her eyes dimming, overwhelmed by a realization that defied all sense. Then, "See? I don't need your help. You'll only be a hindrance, so shoo." His insensitivity shattered her daze like a hammer through glass. She snapped her head to him, her disgusted grimace deepening. "You could have said that in any other way but that." She didn't wait for a response. Without another glance, she turned sharply and began climbing the stairs. Northern remained still for a moment, frowning. Which other way could I have said it? And why the hell was her face red with a frown? Shaking his head slightly, he looked at the clone standing beside him. The clone paid him no mind, its gaze locked onto the incoming wave of monsters. They were closer now, closer than ever. And finally both lines crashed. The smaller monsters were more humanoid than the towering horror itself. Straight-backed, yet their movements were jagged, erratic, making them wholly unpredictable. But unpredictability was a realm Northern and his clones had long mastered. That was, after all, the very essence of chaos footwork. Unpredictability through chaos. Even the one who executes it cannot predict it, until it happens. Northern had refined the footwork into two explicit forms. One where he surrendered to chaos, let its waves carry him. The other where he seized control of chaos, became the wave itself. The latter was a major breakthrough he had achieved within Sura's rift. But the first was something he had continued to hone. Because there was a level of unpredictability that came from estranging even oneself in battle. Fool yourself and you fool your enemy. That was the principle Northern had been building upon for a long time. A cacophony of destruction erupted as the lines connected. Across the battlefield, it was like jagged tendrils of devastation, snaking wildly as walking trees collided with an army of Northerns. Some clones wielded weapons. Others did not. But they commanded fire and ice like extensions of their very being, as though they possessed a second set of hands. Or perhaps a third. There was a limit to how much power the clones could wield. But for these mindless mobs, it was more than enough. They shared his body. They could do everything he could do with it. As for Northern himself, after assuming his new name, he walked forward with unhurried ease, casually slapping away the twisted humanoid trees that dared cross his path. With a flick of his wrist, their bodies tore through the air, sent tumbling hundreds of meters across the frozen ground. His gaze remained locked on a single creature, and it seemed he wasn't the only one who felt this looming confrontation. The forest turtle clenched its massive, clawed fists. His hardened body stiffened, crackling with raw, terrifying power. The air trembled with subtle shockwaves as its sheer presence distorted the atmosphere. Northern did the same. Well, not quite. The clench of his fist didn't ripple with the same brute force. Instead, a dark chain unraveled from his wrist, whipping into the air with violent grace. It spiraled outward, twisting with raw energy, sending crackling streaks of lightning tearing through the frozen battlefield. Then, Northern took flight, and in the same instant, the forest turtle charged forward. The two forces collided, and the world exploded in a cataclysm of shockwaves. Chapter 786. The Forest Turtle, Part 2. The impact sent tremors through the very fabric of reality. Trees, hundreds of meters away, splintered and burst, their frozen forms unable to withstand the sheer force that rippled outward from the point of collision. The travelers crossing the bridge, nearing its midpoint, were suddenly assaulted by a violent gust. The wind howled, almost tearing them off their feet, their bodies flailing dangerously over the chasm. Had it not been for the female drifter and shadow drifter gripping them tightly, the old man and pregnant woman would have been flung into the air. Roma, instinct sharp as ever, ducked low, allowing the shockwave to whip past overhead. The entire bridge groaned under the pressure. Not the metal that remained firm, forged strong enough to withstand almost anything, but the ground beneath it. Tremors cracked through the earth, shaking loose the rigid bond that held the bridge's foundation together. A fracture deepened. The bridge was at risk. Roma gritted her teeth, casting a sharp glance back. There, in the distance, stood Northern, confronting the towering forest turtle. She clenched her fists. There was little they could ask for. Northern battling the monster was already more than enough. To expect him to fight while being careful of them was unreasonable. Shoving such thoughts aside, she rushed forward, pushing the travelers ahead. The bald-headed drifter remained behind, his long-barreled firearm charged with soul essence. With a sharp hiss of release, he fired downward, the high-impact blast shredding the heads of the twisted abominations crawling toward the bridge's base. Roma and the other two kept moving, helping the mundane humans cross. The female drifter, positioned at the front, wielded a long glaive, though so far, she hadn't needed to use it. The reason? The bald-headed drifter was a fearsome shooter. Each time an abomination attempted to climb, boom, another fell, its skull obliterated in a flash of precise, calculated destruction. Northern's chain met the forest turtle's massive fist, a collision that defied comprehension. The dark links didn't merely wrap around the creature's arm. They bit into it, like fangs of an insatiable beast. The chains tore through the hardened, bark-like exterior with devastating precision. But the turtle was far from helpless. With a sound like an ancient forest being torn asunder, it wrenched its arm back, pulling Northern through the air with sheer, overwhelming force. Yet even as his body was yanked forward, Northern's lips curved into a slight smile. This was exactly what he wanted. He twisted mid-flight, allowing the force to carry him. The illusioned hefter had already materialized in his grip, its blade absent, as if swallowed by the wind. Still tethered to the monster's arm, Northern rode the momentum, gliding through the air like a specter. Then, he plunged the invisible blade into the creature's bark-covered torso, and tore through it with ferocious and brutal speed without hesitation. A streak of destruction ripped across the monster's body as Northern carved his way through its massive form. The forest turtle roared, a sound so deep, so guttural, it felt as if the earth itself was howling. A massive crack had been torn open in its wooden exterior. But something was wrong. Northern narrowed his eyes. No blood. The realization flickered through his mind, just as the wound began to shift. His eyes narrowed even more as he peered through the distance to see what was happening. And there, beneath the ruptured bark, he saw it, a skin of iron, emerging from the cracks, closing the gaping wound of darkness, hardening, reinforcing, making sure the next strike wouldn't break through so easily. Northern's expression darkened. This one might take a little while. Of course it would. It was an abysmal maelstrom, one of the rarest and most dangerous of its kind. Abyssal monsters were already a rarity. Apex class? They should be even rarer. But Northern had the worst damn luck imaginable. Below, Northern's clones continued their relentless assault on the smaller creatures. Their coordinated chaos was like a symphony of destruction. Fire and ice wove together, their deadly harmony creating a battlefield of shifting, untamed energy. Each clone moved with perfect unpredictability, yet within their randomness lay an underlying pattern, one only Northern could truly comprehend. Then suddenly, the forest turtle dropped to all fours. Its massive shell shifted upward, exposing its reinforced back. Northern's instincts flared, but before he could react, dozens of wooden spikes erupted from its shell, shooting toward him with lethal intent. His response was instantaneous. The chain connecting him to the creature blazed with electrical energy, lightning arcing violently through the battlefield. The spikes never reached him. Caught in a web of crackling power, they disintegrated into ash before they could even graze his body. But the turtle wasn't finished. Its entire form began to shift, with splitting and reforming as though a tree were growing in accelerated motion. It wasn't just a turtle anymore. It was becoming something else. Its body compressed, tree trunks twisting tighter and tighter, compacting into a form that was leaner, faster. A grotesque evolution built for mobility and ferocity. Northern descended, his feet touching the ground with deliberate grace. The chain retracted, coiling around his arm like a serpent returning to its master. His eyes burned, gleaming with the same intensity as the monster's transformation. He smirked. So, his voice rang out, unnaturally clear over the battlefield. You've been holding back too. The forest turtle's response was a chorus of roars, the very air quivering with its rage. It no longer resembled the hulking horror it had been. Now it bore a striking resemblance to the smaller creatures still battling Northern's clones, a more nimble, lethal abomination. Still slightly hunched, its shell began to crack open. A thick hiss filled the air as clouds of green smoke billowed from its ruptured back. The shell crumbled apart, revealing the horror beneath. Wooden tentacles flared outward, twisting through the air. Each tentacle was a nightmare in itself, resembling a hydra, lined with gaping maws and glowing, ancient eyes, their eerie green light brimming with sentience. Northern raised a hand. Instantly, every single clone halted their battles. As one, they turned. The smaller creatures froze, sensing the sudden shift in the air. Then they retreated, scurrying back toward their master, like leaves swept into a storm. The battlefield fell silent. The air grew heavy, thick with anticipation. Both sides had unveiled another layer of their strength. And what came next would decide far more than just the outcome of this fight. Northern exhaled, his smirk deepening. I'll pay you the courtesy of not holding back too. He snapped his fingers. Two rifts tore open in the air. He stared at the forest abomination, a devilish grin curving his lips. And then, two figures stepped through the rift. Chapter 787. The Early Morning Battle, Part 1. Two figures stepped through the rift. One was a woman clad in white and red armor, her crimson spear glinting like liquid fire. The other was an ashen-haired man, his eyes burning with an all-consuming fury, so intense that it seemed he could set the world ablaze with his will alone. Northern spoke without looking at them. "I hope it wasn't bothersome to call upon you so soon after finishing a tough battle." Jessie cracked her neck, the bones popping like breaking twigs, a smile curling her lips, a demented nun in a battlefield of the damned. "Not at all, my lord," she exhaled with a soft chuckle. "We didn't get much of a chance to be of significant use in that fight. It was beyond our league." She cast a sideways glance at Linus, whose face remained frozen in unrelenting fury. He said nothing. Northern was silent for a moment. He hadn't demanded a full recount of the battle, not with everything happening before him. But from the way Byran and the others looked ragged, it was obvious the fight had been a brutal one. There were several reasons he had chosen these two instead of using his void summon. But the one that overshadowed every other reason. He wanted them to grow, to exist in the world. During his journey, his thoughts had drifted, not just about passion, purpose, or the true meaning of power, but something far more personal. Their perspective. How they felt. For the longest time, he had never considered it. What was it like, being limited to his soulscape? What did they feel, being confined to the limitless void? Did they not long to see the central plane? And so, Northern had decided he would treat them more like people and less like souls bound to him. With a slow shake of his head, his gaze steeled with focus. The forest turtle's minions were already gathering, their grotesque forms quivering with readiness. They seemed to have regained their confidence, a dark tide of writhing monstrosities, waiting for the moment to lunge. Northern exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "So, do I dismiss my clones? If I do, I can focus all my power on myself." His azure gaze flickered toward them. "Will the two of you be enough to handle the smaller ones?" Smaller. That was the word Northern used. But these creatures were not small. Each one was a catastrophic hellion. A single one was more than enough to kill a master. And there were hundreds of them against only 2 masters. But these two had been forged in an immolating crucible. Their souls were on the verge of evolution, and their combat experience was unmatched. Raw, savage, ruthless. They were created to kill. Only now, their target had shifted. Less human. More monsters. "Of course we would be able to, my lord." Jessie answered with enthusiasm while Linus darkened his face. A chilling silence settled over the battlefield. The wind howled softly, eerily. Mist drifted, weaving through the air, obscuring the open expanse like a ghostly veil. Morning had long risen, its golden light stretching across the land. But here, in this place of war, time itself seemed unwilling to intrude. The battlefield ignored the dawn. It drowned in a fearsome, terrifying, and deafening silence. The kind of silence before a storm. And from a certain perspective, the deadliest kind. Northern exhaled, and grinned. "Well then." He moved, and in the blink of an eye, he vanished. A thunderous gale exploded outward from where he had stood, the sheer force shaking the ground beneath Jessie and Linus. Their eyes barely tracked him, a blur tearing across the battlefield. The next moment, Northern was already in the air, lunging toward the creature's head. The forest abomination reacted instantly. Dragon-like tentacles lashed outward, curling through the air with terrifying speed. They extended limitlessly, moving in from every direction, intended to crush him mid-air before he could land a single strike. But Northern, he did not fly. He flowed. Like the wind itself, he wove between the curling tendrils, moving with impossible fluidity. Not dodging, but slipping through the chaos as if it had been choreographed just for him. The illusioned hefter swung with every movement, but its blade remained invisible. From a distance, it looked as though Northern was merely throwing his hands into the air, conducting a symphony, guiding an unseen orchestra while gliding through the sky like an aimless current. Then, a flicker of white sparks, a thunderous boom split the air, and the tentacles fell, severed, carved apart in several places. All of them. Not a single head remained uncut. Jessie paled as she watched, staggered, breath caught in her throat. Linus, too, felt the shock ripple through him. But unlike Jessie, his fury only swelled. Teeth grinding, he clicked his tongue, the rage inside him burning hotter, searing his insides. And then, beneath his breath, he muttered, "Just when I thought I finally had a chance to beat the shit out of him." But neither Jessie nor Linus had the luxury to watch. The moment Northern vanished into the air, his clones vanished with him. Not as fading illusions, not as dissolving shadows. They simply ceased to exist. And with that, the smaller forest abominations began their march. Savage, relentless, faster than before. Jessie took a step forward, her crimson spear twirling lightly in one hand. A simple motion, yet it violently disturbed the air, warping the atmosphere around her. Linus shifted his sheathed sword, his fingers settling around the hilt. His eyes burned, locked onto the advancing monstrosities. Between the two of them, there was something unspoken, a connection woven not by words, but by movement. An invisible string of flow, tying them together, matching rhythms, matching steps. Even the rise and fall of their shoulders seemed to follow a seamless pattern. Then they moved. The wind trembled as their figures blurred forward. Or perhaps, their sheer ferocity carved through the wind itself. Jessie's spear flashed. With minimal movement, she slashed the head clean off the first abomination lunging at her. Before its corpse even hit the ground, her spear twirled, retracted, then it exploded forward. A blinding thrust tore through another creature's chest, bursting into a shockwave that rippled outward, disrupting the others, giving her momentum and leverage. As she danced through the slaughter, the abominations fell, subjected to the cruelty of her spear. It glowed, a wind of gore, carving heads from bodies, splitting spines apart. Jessie wove through them, movements unnatural, unhinged, hypnotic. Like an insane nun, a twisted grin frozen on her face as she dashed back and forth, moving with her spear as fluidly as blood flowing through veins. Linus was just as fearsome as Jessie, though he lacked her demented elegance. Instead, he tore through the battlefield like a bull carved out of blades. His strikes were unstoppable. And though he was a swordsman, he fought with his entire body. As his blade fell upon one enemy, his hand was already reaching for another. As his sword cleaved through the first, he was either plunging it into the next, or using his knee to shatter wood, or simply hurling his victim aside. All while his sword was already flying toward its next target. The silver blade glinted beneath the golden sky, catching the morning light, singing with a thin, metallic voice. A somber dirge whispered into the chaos. Each strike, each departure, sending another abomination falling. The battlefield became a masterpiece of brutality, a weave of violence, cruel yet mesmerizing. Though these creatures should have overpowered them, their experience told a different story. The limitless void had forged them in harsher crucibles. Jessie had Black Mamba to thank. She could adapt to anything. Any shift in the battlefield, any slight movement. She could sense it, mold herself to it, become the storm within it. Though she needed space to wield her spear, she was never restricted when she lacked it. Instead, she broke through space itself. Her movements, short, sharp, deadly, manipulating momentum in unnatural ways, crashing through her enemies with demented ferocity. Linus, on the other hand, was a bull of blades, burning with unrelenting fury. His movements were raw, furious, untamed. The air itself burned with his presence, thick with his bloodlust, pressing down on his enemies, infecting them with a paralyzing, animalistic fear. And in that moment of hesitation, he struck. Northern, watching through one compartment of his chaos eyes, exhaled as he clashed against the regenerated tentacles of the monster. A fleeting thought passed through his mind. Damn, they've grown. I'm so jealous. Northern was the most unaware of his own growth. Perhaps he acknowledged that he had become stronger, but he often failed to recognize just how much. A tentacle crashed toward him, but before it could land, his fist shot forward, crushing it mid-air. Splinters of wood exploded outward, the fragmented remains scattering like brittle glass. Yet even as one fell, 3 more were already incoming. And behind them, the shattered one was already reassembling itself. Northern's body moved on instinct. He shot upward, then dove down. A perfect, fluid 540-degree kick slammed into the first tentacle, crushing it against the second against the third. The creature staggered sideways, recoiling from the impact. A brief opening. Northern seized it, shifting his compartment view from Linus and Jessie. He needed to check on the travelers. His chaos eyes darted toward the bridge, and his heart clenched. A strange, eel-like creature had coiled around part of the bridge. The older woman, the one leading the group. She was on her knees. Blood streamed down her face, her body leaning against a broken spear. Further ahead, the shadow drifter, the bald-headed drifter, and Roma. All 3 stood rigidly, their swords clenched in a desperate deadlock. Their blades blocked something, a serpentine tangle of tentacles, each one gleaming like a flamberge, twisting, serrated, unrelenting. What the hell is going on? For the first time in the battle, a flicker of genuine alarm flashed through Northern's mind. That split-second distraction was enough. The flying tentacles struck, slamming into his figure. The impact sent him hurtling toward the ground. A thunderous crash. The earth shattered beneath him, snow and debris exploding outward as his body skidded across the battlefield. For the first time, Northern lost his footing. Chapter 788. Bad timing. The bridge stretched over 100 meters long, perhaps closer to 150. But distance wasn't the real obstacle. It was the abominations. They crawled relentlessly up the bridge's metallic legs, clawing at each other in a savage frenzy, each one desperate to be the first to climb. Below, at the river's foundation, the waters churned, littered with monstrosities writhing beneath the bridge, eager for their first taste of flesh. It was only thanks to Kion, the bald drifter, that they hadn't been overwhelmed. Kion was undoubtedly a masterful shooter. His barrel shots plummeted down like judgment from the heavens, eviscerating most abominations in a single strike. For those that proved resilient, clinging to life even after a direct hit, the second shot always finished the job. By all logic, he should have been leading the cohort. He was their best defense, their most reliable firepower. But Kion had one dire flaw. He was long-sighted. He could only see distant targets clearly. So, inevitably, he had to stay at the rear, ensuring nothing reached them from behind. Despite this setback, their journey was smooth. The probability of crossing the bridge without incident seemed hopeful. The exit was within sight. The end was just ahead. Then, the bridge trembled. A deep, unnatural vibration rippled beneath their feet. Everyone's heads snapped backward. First, they thought it had come from the battlefield behind them. But then, their faces turned white. Cold sweat dripped down their backs. That wasn't from the battlefield. That was close. Too close. The sensation was different. It felt like something immensely powerful had grabbed the bridge itself, its grip strong enough to make it tremble. Roma swallowed hard. Carefully, placing one foot in front of the other, she approached the edge of the bridge, her pulse pounding against her ribs. Her gaze dropped down to the river, and then, she saw it. A black mass, covering a portion of the water beyond them, slithering, its form coiling, writhing, slowly pulling itself up the metallic pillar of the bridge. The monster ignored the bridge's groaning protests as it crawled upward, obstinate, relentless. Immediately, as Roma peered at it, Kion's barrel roared. A thunderous gunshot split the air, as if the atmosphere itself had been torn apart by force. The black eel's flesh burst apart from the impact, but it didn't stop. It didn't even flinch. The peeled-away skin revealed another layer, a slick, black, slimy hide beneath. Without hesitation, Kion fired again. His soul essence-infused round streaked through the air, colliding with the creature. But the result was the same. The monster kept crawling, now slightly faster, far ahead of the bridge where everyone could see it. Kion gritted his teeth and let loose a full barrage. His cock-and-shoot rifle was powerful, its fire force staggering, but it required precision, timing. He ignored the exhaustion, his hands moving with terrifying efficiency. Shoot, cock, shoot. Each round was a blast of raw soul essence, ripping the air apart with deafening force. But it wasn't enough. His chest burned, his arms trembled. Each recoil stung like fire, rattling his bones. Yet he bit down on the pain, and fired again. Kion had never shot this much, this fast. Not in a single engagement. But the most infuriating part, nothing they did was slowing it down. Worse, the black mass was accelerating. The cohort broke into a run, trying to outrun it. But they were running with a pregnant woman and an old man. The elder's frail body struggled to keep up. And then, the woman suddenly screamed. Her legs buckled. Roma caught her instantly, pressing herself against her to keep her from collapsing entirely. Her voice was sharp, urgent. What's wrong? The pregnant woman turned to her, eyes wide with terror. Her voice trembled. It's coming. Roma's eyes widened. What? She stammered, her mind scrambling for words. And then, suddenly, she clenched her fists and let out an exasperated breath. Your baby has a really bad sense of timing. The lady drifter, Rita, frowned darkly. It can't come now. Her voice was sharp, cutting. You have to hold it in. Hell, we don't even have time to be standing around like this. Roma understood exactly what she meant. Even if the woman didn't say it outright, her tone carried a truth much heavier than her words. The pregnant woman wouldn't be able to move. It was a miracle she had made it this far. So close to the end of her pregnancy, forced to run, pushed beyond her limits. And now, at the worst possible moment, her child had decided to enter the world. On a bridge, above a river full of monsters, with a massive abomination crawling toward them. Great. Just great. But still, they couldn't abandon her. And Roma would never let that happen. Her eyes snapped backward. Going back was not an option. The battlefield behind them was even worse than what lay ahead. Then, Tyr, the shadow drifter, suddenly gnarled in frustration and rushed forward, abandoning the group. Rito hesitated. Her gaze flickered between Roma, the pregnant woman barely able to stand, and the trembling old man. Then, she gritted her teeth and stepped forward. But her stride was different, not cowardly like Tyr's desperate flight. She spun her spear in one hand, then slammed it into the bridge's metal surface. Her face darkened. A warrior's resolve settled into her stance. Roma's breath hitched. What are you doing? Rito sighed deeply. Her voice was calm, steady. I'm nearing the end of my life anyway. Her fingers tightened around her spear. Protecting one that's about to start its own. Seems like the right thing to do. Roma's eyes narrowed, as if trying to peer into her soul. Rita continued without looking back. Her voice held a quiet, unwavering certainty. I have spent my life as a wretched wreck, cast aside, abandoned by my own kin, discarded because I was nothing more than a burden. A walking disaster they wanted to forget. A bitter chuckle escaped her lips. I've never been someone worth saving. Never had anything worth protecting. She exhaled slowly, the weight of her past pressing against her ribs. But then, her grip on the spear hardened. Her shoulders straightened. Her stance became unshakable. But this is different. She lifted her chin, eyes steady. A life is about to begin, and I am ashamed that, for a moment, I considered running again. Because that's all I've ever done, run. And I am tired of running. Her jaw clenched. A flicker of vicious, self-directed anger burned in her eyes. If this is the bridge where I lay my life for the birth of something purer, something better, then let it be so. Finally, she turned her head just slightly. Roma caught the flicker of defiance in her gaze. If I'm going to die, her grip tightened on the spear. Let it be for something that matters. Then, she stepped forward. Her spear sliced the air, sharp as a blade of judgment. And she did not look back. Chapter 789. Last Stand. The shadow drifter was nearing the midpoint of the bridge. His face darkened in a grimace as he pushed himself forward. Suddenly, something snaked out from beneath the bridge. Too fast, too sudden for him to react. A sharp, searing pain tore through his chest. Before he could even comprehend the attack, the impact launched him backward. At that same moment, Rita sidestepped and narrowly dodged him, her instincts sharper than thought. She hurled her spear forward just as the tentacle struck again. The collision sent her reeling. She landed hard, her boots screeching against the bridge's metallic surface as she skidded backward. What in amen's desolate hills is that power? Her eyes widened as she glanced at her spear, its shaft smoldering from the impact. The tentacles coiled around the bridge, anchoring themselves. A massive black eel-like entity pulled itself up onto the structure, slithering into view. It was a grotesque mound of black, writhing flesh, its form disturbingly uneven, as if shaped by some deranged force. It had no visible eyes. Or perhaps it had eyes, just not in a place where one would expect. Its bulk pulsed, as though it had adapted over time, learning to move, to drag itself forward, its grotesque shape undulating as it pushed against the bridge. Beneath its slimy, ink-black hide, hidden muscles twisted and uncoiled, bursting outward in the form of thick, serpentine tentacles. It paused, an eerie stillness settling over the battlefield. Then, as if responding to unseen stimuli, its tentacles unfurled, more and more, coiling and thickening like monstrous sinewy ropes. Each one rippled with unnatural power, carrying the force of a master's full-strength punch. Then they attacked. A dozen black tendrils lashed forward, tearing through the air like spears. So did Rita. She met the onslaught head-on. Her spear sang, a deadly, chilling song as it wove through the air, a whirlwind of sharp arcs and blinding sparks. Her movements were erratic, almost reckless, but they spoke of something undeniable. Experience. Every inch of her stance, every flicker of motion, the sheer force behind her parries, was a testament to her years of survival. She had been here before. She had fought in too many rifts, survived too many deathly clashes, and learned too many brutal lessons. Every style she wielded, every movement, was a scar of knowledge, carved from battles that should have ended her. And now, in this moment, as she bared the pinnacle of her strength, it was clear. Rita was the strongest of the three drifters. Each collision sent shockwaves rippling through the air, a relentless storm of force and fury. The sheer succession of impacts was so fast that Rita couldn't afford to blink. Her grip tightened. She clenched her teeth and locked herself into position, wielding her spear in one hand, her muscles burning as she deflected strike after strike. The creature's assault was a blur of motion, an endless flurry of tentacle strikes raining down upon her. She was holding on barely. Time had blurred into a single, ceaseless moment. Had it even been 30 seconds? Maybe less. Her ligaments screamed in protest. Her weapon. She could feel the fractures forming, the splintering vibrations rattling through her grip. Both her hands and her spear were nearing their limits. But her eyes burned with unshakable resolve. The fear of death paled in comparison to whatever drove her forward. But resolve alone wouldn't win this fight, or hold out long enough for them to. No. I have to win. She forced the thought into her mind, steeling herself anew. Even if it cost her life, she had to kill this creature. She had to protect everyone, their lives depended on it. Especially the babies. Her gaze flicked to the back of the bridge. Roma and the elderly man were kneeling beside the woman, preparing to bring a new life into the world. Right in the middle of battle. It was insanity. Kion had moved closer, his attention shifting as he focused his barrels toward the bridge's rear. Tyr, too, had taken a heavy beating, especially from the first strike. She had to act. The moment the thought bloomed in her mind, something changed. Clouds of ashen smoke began creeping along the bridge, thick, suffocating, unnatural. It spread like wildfire, but there were no flames. The world dimmed. The battlefield became a haze of curling, shifting mist. Then the smoke thickened. The fog began to coalesce, its mass growing until it formed an imposing wall at the bridge's rear, sealing off the battlefield behind them. Kion noticed immediately, halting his fire. At the same time, Rita bellowed, "Focus all your barrels on the monster. Deal with it while I keep it occupied." Kion grinned. "Say no less." His voice wasn't as loud as hers. It didn't need to be. The roar of his gunfire was answer enough. Immediately, the terrifying roar of gunfire bellowed into the air. A brutal, unrelenting announcement of destruction. But nothing changed. The battle remained just as intense. The Black Eel's speed and strength showed no sign of waning, and Rita was still burdened with the crushing responsibility of holding the line, deflecting every attack, ensuring nothing passed through her. She had managed to seal off the rear of the bridge with her talent. For now it held firm. But that meant her essence was burning away faster than ever. As a master, she had already been channeling her essence to reinforce her body, enhancing her muscles, reflexes, and power just to withstand the monster's relentless onslaught. But now she was burning through it at an unsustainable rate. She bit down on her lip, the taste of blood sharp against her tongue. I really am pathetic. The thought barely settled in her mind before. Crack. Her spear let out a heart-wrenching cry, then snapped. The moment fractured into pure havoc. The force of the break sent her staggering backward, her balance momentarily lost. The monster did not hesitate. Its tentacles lunged, seizing the opportunity. A rapid volley of shots blasted through the air, smashing into their edges, forcing them to curl back with shrieks of resistance. But it wasn't enough. The reprieve lasted less than half a second before another dozen tentacles lashed toward her. Faster, deadlier, ruthless. The shadow drifter dodged, his body weaving through the battlefield. Uncaring, as always. Kion fired another round, but the tentacles kept coming. Rita was vulnerable. She fell to the ground, her breathing rapid and chaotic. Two tentacles, faster than the rest, slipped past Kion's gunfire, their massive forms descending upon her. She had no time to react. And then, a figure blurred forward. Chapter 790. New Life on a Bridge of Death. Someone none of them would have expected suddenly appeared in front of Rita, and deflected both strikes. The sheer impact alone sent her hurtling through the air, her body colliding hard against the thick wall of smoke that protected them from the rear. Roma groaned. Blood spilled from her lips, but she didn't stay down. She pushed herself up, and was already moving. Rita, still on the ground, stared in disbelief. The one person, who had saved her from the destructive tentacle of death wasn't a drifter. It wasn't Kion. It wasn't the shadow drifter. It was Roma, a mundane human, a girl she had considered weak. Someone none of them had placed any value on at all. Even the shadow drifter hesitated for a split second, his gaze flickering with something close to shock. Kion's eyes widened slightly, then his lips curled into a pleased grin. Good. However little it was, the time Roma had bought them was enough for him to press the attack. His eyes gleamed with cold intent. Time to switch things up. A silvery glow ignited in Kion's eyes, casting eerie shadows across his face. A cold, steamy breath escaped his lips, curling into the thickened air. The atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavy, dense. He tightened his grip on the blaster, his fingers coiling around the trigger with ruthless precision. And then, he fired. The first shot tore through the air, a violent shockwave rippling outward from the force. When it connected, boom! A vicious explosion erupted, shattering through the bridge, shaking the very structure beneath them. All eyes turned toward Kion. He stepped forward slowly, cocking another round, his gaze cold, unreadable, focused. Another shot boomed across the battlefield. Another detonation bloomed outward, ripping through the monster. This time, the creature screamed. A raw, agonized wail. Almost telepathic, but not whispered into their minds, but something else. A sound so unnatural, so terrible that it warped the very air, hijacking every wave of sound around it. The painful cry tore into their eardrums, shaking them to their very cores. But Kion only loaded another shot. And then another shot tore through the air. A thunderous blast rattled the metallic bridge, sending a fearsome tremor surging through its structure. The creature wailed. A soundless agony twisted through the atmosphere, its presence squeezed and contorted by the relentless assault. The noise was an eerie blend of pain and fury. It assaulted their ears, a sickening resonance that made the very air feel wrong. And then, the pregnant woman could no longer contain it. She had been stifling her groans, biting down on her pain, desperately trying to suppress even the smallest sound. But now she screamed, a raw, agonized wail, breaking free in an uncontrollable release of suffering. But it did not matter. The wall of ashen fog devoured every sound. Rita's talent ability had already ensured that nothing inside the fog could be heard beyond it. Besides, the battle behind the bridge was already so colossal, so terrifyingly loud, that anything happening here was but a whisper in the storm. Kion kept firing, shot after shot, hammering into the beast with merciless precision. At first, his aim was frighteningly accurate, every shot a perfect hit. But as he advanced, his angles began to twist, bending into unpredictable trajectories. Yet somehow they still connected. They still tore through the black eel. And then, finally, he let his arms drop, his chest heaving. His body trembled, his muscles screaming from the exertion. His reserve of soul essence was plummeting, fast. This ability raised his firepower, but in return it drained him. The physical recoil of the blaster had taken its toll. He couldn't keep going. Even so, a cold light still burned in his eyes, a lingering resolve. But his body was failing. The monster had suffered. Its black, lustrous flesh was now riddled with scorched holes, burned open by his relentless barrage. But, beneath those holes, something writhed. Thick, sinewy black muscles. Coiling, tensing, pulsing. It hadn't been enough. The damage, however devastating, hadn't reached the true body beneath. That slimy outer layer, it was just a shell. And already it was regenerating. The wounds were closing. The parchments of holes were sealing back together, as if the damage had never happened. And the only one capable of piercing past that layer was out of breath. A quiet tension hung over them. Roma clenched her fists. She wiped her nose, smearing fresh blood across her face. Her body trembled, her arms sore, her own internal wounds weighing down on her. Barely a minute had passed. And yet it felt like an eternity. The atmosphere was suffocating. The air was cold, heavy. No one knew what to do. And then, amidst that silence, a cry bloomed into the air. It was sudden, strange, and unexpected, like a beautiful lily flower unfolding in the dead of winter. For a moment Rita forgot everything. She had never imagined she would feel this much joy for something unattached to her. Roma, who was closest, turned back. Her eyes landed on the old man, who now held a newborn child in his arms. He had wrapped it in a makeshift linen, torn from his own scarf and the lower pieces of the mother's gown. A bright smile spread across Roma's face. Her heart leaped. The cry, that tiny, fragile cry, it lifted the weight off the battlefield. It chased away the suffocating dread. It was life. In the midst of death, life had been born. Rita smiled. Reaching down, she picked up her broken spear and gripped it tightly, as if it were whole. The expression on her face, it was victorious. and for a brief, surreal moment the black eel wanted to question it. "What the hell are you so happy about? Nothing awaits you but a gruesome death." Not that it could speak. But the creature reacted nonetheless. The moment Rita stood, its tentacles slithered out once more, dozens upon dozens, curling into the air like serpents preparing to strike. At the same time, the shadow drifter shamefully drew his longsword. His face was shadowed by focus, a pale, terrified focus. Kion stepped forward, his hands trembling as he lifted his blaster. He glanced sideways at Rita, standing beside him. "So what from here?" Rita smiled somberly. "This is my last stand. Ki. Let me shine a little more, okay?" Kion frowned. Then he steadied himself. His grip tightened, his stance hardened, and his eyes locked onto the enemy. Then he spoke. "You're silly if you think dying like this is noble. We must live, all of us, to carry on the weight of the hundreds we've lost. No one should die anymore." A pause. Then Roma stepped forward. She nodded, her voice steady. "I agree. I can't take it anymore." Her fingers curled into fists. "I'm sick and tired of people dying." Her gaze hardened as she turned to the monster. But before she could react, a blur shot past her. A razor-thin line of blood appeared across her cheek. It happened faster than any of them could follow. A terrifying clang rang through the air. Rita had blocked the strike. But something was different. It was stronger. A terrible vibration ran through her body. Her legs buckled. Her vision blurred. Blood burst from her mouth. She collapsed to her knees, only barely managing to grip her spear to keep herself from falling completely. But the battle was far from over. Because dozens of tentacles were already shooting forward. Chapter 791. The Ruin Night. In that moment, a storm of thoughts tore through Rita's mind. Too many. Too fast. She had so much to reflect on, but not enough time to even grasp a single thought before it slipped away, lost to the flood. She had lived a life of regrets. And though she had welcomed her own death, she detested it all the same. She hated it. Hated the finality. Hated the unfairness. Hated that she hadn't been given more time. More time to right her wrongs. But what could she do? Nothing. A single, shattered fragment of a second stretched out, too slow and too fast at once. The monster's tentacles lashed toward her, carving through the air. Yet the world around her seemed to fracture and warp. Everything was too slow, too fast, too much, too little. The hurried shouts, the gasps of horror, all of it blurred. Sound collapsed in on itself, muffled and distant, like she had been sealed inside a soundproof void. All except for one thought, a single, piercing whisper in the darkness of her mind. Death. The tentacles tore through the air, closer than ever, their sheer speed ripping the wind apart as they closed in. Each one crushed the space around it, displacing the air with a force so terrible it felt as though the very atmosphere was collapsing inward. They were coming all at once. A storm of devastation about to erase her from existence. Rita knew. She wouldn't even have the chance to process her own death. Her bones, her neck, her entire being, all of it would be shattered instantly. And yet, somehow, the impact rang through the air. A deep, resounding tremor that sent her flying. Not from pain, not from destruction, but from something else. The tentacles recoiled sharply, twisting backward as if struck. They trembled in the air. Rita landed hard on her back, rolling away from the force. The shockwave was brutal, but that was it. No sharp, searing pain. No instant death. Nothing. She could still feel. She was still breathing. Still seeing. Am I alive? She wasn't sure. Within the space of contact, the precise moment when the black eel's tentacles should have torn through her like paper, there had been no one fast enough to block it. It was impossible. Her wide eyes traced back to where she had been standing just seconds ago. And there, a boy stood, his faded black hair whipped against the wind, strands lifting with the soft breeze that carried the scent of battle. Encased in armor, black as abyssal stone. His form radiated an unnatural, malevolent presence. Ragged orange veins coursed across the dark plating, glowing like cracks in the heart of a volcano. A night of ruin, standing between the monster and the humans. And yet, only his clothes had changed. The armor was new, but his presence was unmistakable. They recognized him, and they were horrified, especially Roma. He stood so close, his features starkly visible to her, and her mind reeled with the only question that mattered. If he was here, then who was fighting there? But they had no answer. The ashen fog behind them was still too thick, slowly crumbling but dense enough to hide what lay beyond. And the monsters, they were already slamming against the barrier, clawing, gnashing, some even climbing the bridge. The wall wouldn't hold forever, and neither would their certainty of what was truly happening. Northern frowned darkly, rolling his shoulders as he let out a sharp curse. His gaze flicked backward. Eyes widened as they saw what a baby in the arms of the old man, on a battlefield. Damn it! What the hell happened here? And why is there a baby? He paused, then shook his head with a frustrated sigh. Never mind. Why am I even asking? This isn't the time for that. His eyes shifted, sweeping over everyone, taking quick mental notes. They were fine for now. The only one who looked truly dire was Rita. That was on the outside. Then his gaze landed on Roma. His frown deepened. She looked fine mostly, except for the steady stream of blood running from her nose. His brows pulled into a deeper grimace. Why are you standing in the middle of a battle with a devilish hellion? His voice cut through the air, sharp with anger, but not loud, not deafening. Roma tried to respond, but the words scattered on her tongue. The weight of his glare made it suddenly difficult to articulate. Her fingers twitched at her sides. She had helped. She had done something right. Why the hell was he mad about that? But all she could do was lower her head. Northern exhaled sharply, then flicked his hand backward. His motion curt and absolute. All of you retreat. I'll take care of this quickly. Kion hesitated. Then, forcing himself to speak, he stepped forward. Excuse me. His voice carried both respect and unease. I don't mean to sound rude, but this thing is powerful. We barely managed to land a critical hit, and it has regenerative abilities. Northern's expression stilled. He tilted his head slightly. It does? Kion nodded. And that slimy skin you see, it's just an outer shell. It protects the real body underneath. Northern's frown deepened for a moment, then almost immediately relaxed. That's fine. His voice was calm, certain. I'll finish this quickly nonetheless. Before Kion could raise another objection, Northern vanished. The wind ruptured in his wake, a sharp blast forcing Kion to stagger backward. All of them, every single pair of eyes, had been fixed on him. And yet, they lost him. Even the monster. Since Northern had appeared on the battlefield, the creature had been different, tensed, careful. The air around it had shifted. And now, that change had become undeniable. The ruined knight appeared, a shadow against the cold embrace of the air. He descended freely, his form carving through the sky with a fearsome grace. Northern's fingers curled into a fist, tightening, hardening, the sheer force behind it enough to shatter steel, to break metals. But then his eyes flicked to the bridge. It won't hold. His jaw tightened. With a sharp exhale, he released the tension in his fist, allowing the power to unravel before it could be unleashed. It was irritating, infuriating even, that he wouldn't be able to gain anything from this battle. But he had to prioritize. His strength was too great. If he wasn't careful, the bridge would collapse. And that was not an option. As Northern flowed downward, the air around him shifted. Then, lances of ice burst into existence. One by one, they manifested midair, forming jagged, crystalline spears that rained down beside him, missiles streaking toward their target. The black eel shifted, his massive form twisted, tentacles veering back, recoiling, tensing. Then they wiggled, coiled, and snapped taut, just for a fraction of a second. And then, they struck. A blitz of motion, blinding, violent. The tentacles shot upward in a devastating volley. A force so impossibly fast, so monstrously strong, it blasted through the air itself. Chapter 792. The Peak of Destruction. The collision was deafening. Ice shattered against writhing, slimy flesh, crystal spears exploding into glittering shards that caught the morning light like descending asteroids on a bright day. But the black eel's tentacles didn't stop. They pressed through the crystalline storm, each impact rippling the air with brutal shock waves. Northern's eyes narrowed. It crushed through my ice? The monster was stronger than expected. Stronger than the ball drifter had given account for. Each tentacle moved with impossible precision, striking not just at his attacks, but at the spaces between them, probing, testing, seeking weakness. This wasn't mindless violence. This was calculation. A small smile curled on Northern's face. Nevertheless, nothing changes. The air temperature plummeted. Northern twisted mid-fall, his armor gleaming with a dark light, pulsing like a heartbeat. Ice crystals formed in his wake, hanging in the air for a breathless moment. Then, they shattered. Razor-sharp fragments spilled downward, glinting like fractured glass. The black eel struck again. Faster now, more desperate. His tentacles didn't just lash out. They wove patterns in the air, a web of motion so complex it distorted space itself. But Northern was no longer there. He phased through the assault like smoke, his form blurring at the edges. The monster's attacks passed through empty air. And in that split second of overextension, Northern struck. His hand shot out, fingers splayed wide, and the world froze. The temperature dropped so violently that the moisture in the air crystallized instantly. A lattice of frost erupted outward, streaking along the length of the nearest tentacle like a bolt of lightning. The black eel recoiled, its flesh crackling, stiffening as the ice tried to take hold. But that outer shell, that protective slime Kion had warned about, it bubbled, shifted, twisted, fighting against the creeping frost. Interesting. Northern's voice was barely a whisper, yet it carried through the battlefield like a blade drawn against stone. The monster's response was anything but subtle. Its entire form convulsed. Then, a sound like tearing metal ripped through the air as its slimy protective shell split along invisible seams. A spray of caustic fluid burst forth, hissing and steaming as it clashed violently against Northern's ice. From the bridge, Kion's breath caught. He watched, wide-eyed, as the battlefield transformed before him. Ice and toxic mist wove together, swirling into patterns that defied reality. Fractals of clashing forces, geometric impossibilities that shouldn't exist. And through it all, Northern descended. His armor's ragged orange veins pulsed brighter, each flicker mirroring the tempo of his breath. He moved like water, flowing around strikes that should have been impossible to dodge. Yet, there was something different now. His movements, once effortless, had become measured, reserved, more calculated. The bridge groaned beneath them. Northern's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The black eel sensed it too. This limitation, this constraint. His attacks shifted. No longer just violent swipes meant to kill. Now they were precise, methodical. It was trying to force Northern into a choice. Defend himself, or protect the bridge. Ice continued to form and shatter between them, each crystal catching the light at impossible angles. A kaleidoscope of refracted chaos. The monster's tentacles left trails in the air, and Northern's eyes tracked it all. Every movement, every ripple. His expression remained unreadable, but something in his stance shifted. A subtle readjustment. Kion felt it before he could understand it. A chill ran down his spine. He was done testing. The air pressure shifted violently. Ears popped across the bridge as the sudden change sent a sharp, invisible shockwave rippling outward. Northern raised his hand. And this time, there was no gradual buildup. No warning. Reality simply cracked. A spiderweb of fractures bloomed in the space around the black eel, each line gleaming with an eerie, inner light. A cold hunger that drained the very heat from the air. Then, the monster's protective shell began to crystallize. Not from the outside in, but from within. As though winter itself had rooted in its core, spreading outward in a slow, merciless bloom. The black eel thrashed. Its tentacles lashed out, the sheer force splitting the air with deafening sonic booms. But each desperate movement only spread the effect faster. The crystallization raced along its flesh, moving like lightning through water. Northern watched, unblinking, unmoved. The monster's frenzy grew. Its attacks, once calculated, now carried the reckless force of panic and rage. Struck harder, wilder, but also sloppier. Easier to read, easier to counter. Northern no longer dodged. He didn't need to. Each tentacle that lunged for him simply stopped. Not frozen. Not blocked. Just caught. Suspended in a moment stretched too thin, the air around the impact point warping, as if reality itself struggled to process what was happening. The black eel convulsed. Its massive form shuddered, the crystallization reaching its core. The very defense that had protected it had become its prison. And still, Northern wasn't finished. Northern's fingers curled inward. A movement so small, so insignificant. And yet, reality bent. The web of fractures began to contract, its glowing lines tightening, squeezing the space around the black eel. This wasn't just freezing anymore. It was compression. The monster's form warped, crushed into a space that shouldn't have existed. The air trembled. Then, a sound like breaking glass split the battlefield. But deeper, richer, more
fundamental.
As if the very laws of physics were groaning beneath an unseen weight, stretched to their breaking point. Roma's nose bled again. But she wasn't the only one. Kion, Tyr, all of them. The very pressure in the air had become unbearable. A suffocating force that coiled around them, warping the world like light bending near a black hole. And through it all, Northern stood perfectly still. Hand raised, expression carved from stone. Systematically unraveling a creature that, moments ago, had seemed unstoppable. The black eel convulsed. Its entire form trembled, and, for the briefest fraction of time, the ice cracked. Northern's eyes narrowed. Then, he closed his fist. Reality shattered. The black eel simply collapsed. No explosion.
No va el entrapture.
No scream of breaking matter. Just compression. An impossibly small point. And then, fragments of broken ice clattered on the ground. The pressure released all at once, unraveling into an eerie, almost surreal silence. A silence so profound it seemed to ring in their ears, echoing in the emptiness the creature had left behind. The toxic mist dissolved, revealing nothing but clear sky and the lingering remains of ice. Fragments of crystals hung in the air, suspended like diamond dust in the morning light. Northern lowered his hand, slow and deliberate. The orange veins along his armor dimmed, their fiery glow retreating into something subdued, almost sleeping. He turned back toward the bridge, his expression unchanged as he scanned the gathered humans. "Well?" he said, voice perfectly calm, untouched by the destruction he had just wrought. "That's done. Now about that baby." Chapter 793, Power Gap. Kion stood frozen. A few seconds stretched into eternity. His mind was a shambles of thoughts, fragments scattered in the wake of what he'd just witnessed. What exactly had happened? Even now, he couldn't put it into words, couldn't even trust his own senses. His entire body felt cold. His eyes trembled. His mouth remained slightly open, the breath in his lungs refusing to move. Every emotion he could name, and countless others he couldn't, swelled inside him, threatening to crush him under their weight. The eel monster, the one they had struggled against for what felt like an eternity, the one they had fought not to defeat, but to survive. Because destroying it had been impossible. None of them had entertained the thought, not even for a second. And yet, this boy, this drifter, he had swooped in, and ended it, like snuffing out an ant beneath his heel. Kion's mind screamed at him to understand, to make sense of it. How? How does this make any sense? Was this truly the gap between a master and a sage? When a drifter became a master, they fully came into the glory of their capabilities. Strength, privilege, and status were guaranteed. It was the safe zone for a drifter, the point where they no longer needed to scrape and struggle for every ounce of power. Because by then, the world needed them. Masters were wanted, revered. Comfort and luxury were within reach. The dangers remained, yes, but they were manageable. Expected. And so, most stayed. Why wouldn't they? A savant was still within reach. Reasonable. Feasible. But a sage? That was different. For most, it was impossible. That was why the majority of drifters remained masters for life. A select few, those deemed truly exceptional, managed to reach the rank of savant. Even then, they chose to stay there, to preserve their lives, to enjoy the wealth and status their power had granted them. 1 in a million refused to settle. 1 in a million chased the peak. Those few became sages. And of that number, an even rarer breed emerged. 1 in 100 of them dared to go further. However, beyond the evanescent rank, that was closer to impossible than it was to possible. A sage and a master were worlds apart in terms of strength. That was an undeniable fact. But Kion wasn't satisfied with that answer. Northern had defeated that monster too easily to be a sage. His mind jolted. A terrifying thought formed. Could he be an ascendant? For a moment his thoughts scattered. The idea felt too overwhelming to hold in place. Then he forced himself to breathe, to calm down. What am I saying? This guy doesn't even look like he's 30. How could he be an ascendant? He exhaled heavily, pressing a palm to his face, as if to wipe away the absurdity of the thought. Meanwhile, Northern stood before them, listening in silence as they explained what had happened. He sighed. His gaze swept over them, unreadable. There was nothing to say. Then his eyes dropped to the fragile bundle in his mother's arms. A flicker of thought stirred. Now that I think about it, wasn't I born in the middle of a disaster too? His memories surfaced with perfect clarity. The 3 sisters who hid him, who never came back. The darkness that moved with its own sentience. The ominous force that loomed, suffocating and vast. He had only caught a glimpse of it. But even then, even as an infant mere hours old, he had felt it. Felt its power. And calling it powerful still felt like an understatement. He looked away, shaking off the weight of the memory. Well, I think you guys should cross the bridge now. His expression remained neutral, but inwardly he thought, I really hope all goes well this time around. With one last glance at them, he turned and activated Chaos Eyes, scanning the battlefield, his vision easily tearing through the veil of ashen clouds. I have to go back to the... He stopped abruptly, and smiled. Wow, they ended it on their own. The moment Northern had lost his footing, skidding backward in a stagger, the tree turtle didn't hesitate. It had lunged, aiming to crush him in that moment of weakness. But in the span of a heartbeat, a brilliant idea bloomed in his mind, and he vanished, teleporting away from the battlefield. Simultaneously, a rift split open in space. Through it, a swordsman emerged, his pristine white hair catching the wind, moving in a slow, melodic sway. Before Byran could even register his surroundings, a monstrous, forest-like titan was lunging at him. Northern did not exactly like the fact that he had to do it, but Byran was the only one he could bother without feeling too guilty. Of all of them, he was the most sentient, the most reasonable. Not that the others weren't reasonable. They just weren't as open with their emotions. But since Byron's arrival, that had started to change. Black Mamba most especially. Despite his stoic Sword King image, Byran had turned out to be eccentric, unpredictable, and, surprisingly, fun to be around. That was why Northern knew he'd take this well. More importantly, He needed to confirm if there was truly a difference between the monsters from the dungeon and the ones that roamed the surface world. And if there was, just how deep did it go? And it turned out he had made the correct decision. Byran, despite claiming to be tired, had killed the monstrous turtle. Jesai and Linus had handled the rest of the minions. Now all three of them were already marching toward them. Roma wiped away the blood trailing from her nose, her gaze shifting to Northern. Rian, I'm curious about something. She lingered for a moment. Then finally she asked, if you're here, does that mean you've already killed that creature? Northern pulled his attention away from the wall of ashen clouds and glanced at her. Oh right, I had a subordinate take care of it. Roma blinked. A subordinate? You have a subordinate? Have they been traveling with us? Her brows furrowed in confusion, but she barely noticed as another drop of blood rolled down her nose. Northern's gaze sharpened. He leaned in slightly. You've been bleeding consistently? Are you sure you're okay? As he spoke, his hand moved, cleanly wiping away the blood from her nose. Roma hadn't expected that, and her entire face went red. A heat rushed up her neck, spreading to the tips of her ears. For a second, her brain completely stalled. Then, dizziness crashed into her. Her body wavered. Her lips parted, as if to speak. But before she could utter a word, the world spun violently around her and her balance gave way. Northern caught her before she hit the ground. Chapter 794. Unsettling Attachments. Northern frowned darkly as he caught Roma's collapsing frame. He held her for a moment, his grip firm yet uncertain, while the others stood frozen in shock. Her face was pale, far too pale, as if the very rivers of her blood had run dry. His gaze sharpened. Chaos eyes flared to life, dissecting the depths of her being, piercing into the essence of her soul. It was second nature now, an act as effortless as breathing. A mere glance into the embrace of a soul told him everything. Its condition, its burdens, its truths and deceptions. He could discern the tremors of emotion woven into its very fabric. Fear, desire, greed, corruption. Yet at this moment one detail seized his full attention. And when he saw it, his eyes widened. I was wrong. Rita was not the worst off. Roma was. Her suffering had been silent, buried beneath an exterior of endurance. Most of her injuries lay within, unseen. Her organs, ruptured, mangled beyond recognition, barely clung to function. What the hell did she do? The question burned in his mind but never reached his lips. Now was not the time for answers. Now was the time to move. He needed to get her to safety. For a fleeting second, something within him stirred. An unsettling awareness, a prickling sensation in the back of his mind. Why did he care so much? Why did her state unsettle him this much? But just as quickly he dismissed the thought. It didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was keeping her alive. His gaze lifted, locking onto the three figures walking effortlessly through the ashen veil, humans, untouched by the suffocating clouds. As they passed through, Rita, caught in the urgency of battle, flinched. Reflexively, she snapped her head back, bracing for an attack, expecting monsters to have broken through. But what she saw sent conflicting signals racing through her body, both relief and tension coiling at once. The three figures moved with an unsettling grace. The gaunt man at the center stood slightly ahead, his very long white hair flowing with the wind, strands drifting like wisps of mist. His alabaster skin, eerily pale beneath the strange cut of his garb, contrasted against the flickering shadows. The tailored fabric flapped peacefully with the gentle breeze, an eerie contradiction to the death and ruin surrounding them. Beside him, the short-haired woman and the ashen-haired man were no less imposing. Their presence alone was suffocating, not in the way of imminent attack but in something far deeper, something primal. Nothing about them suggested hostility. No raised weapons, no outward aggression. Yet Rita's senses screamed. A pressure coiled at the base of her skull, something supreme and unfamiliar. Instinct alone told her that standing too close to them was like lingering at the edge of an abyss. One wrong step, and the fall was inevitable. Tearing her gaze away, she refocused on her talent ability. What had happened to the monsters that had climbed the bridge? With a slight gesture, she parted the ashen clouds. And there it was. The ground below was a grotesque wasteland of twisted flesh and broken limbs. The monsters had been annihilated. Her gaze shifted back to the three figures just as they neared the sage. Northern, still holding Roma, regarded them with a hard stare. His voice was steady, yet there was an edge beneath it. "Are any of you capable of healing?" The question was foolish, and he knew it the moment it left his lips. Of course they weren't. It was desperation speaking, raw, uncalculated. A part of him barely understood his own actions in that moment. But as soon as the words left his mouth, he caught himself. A breath. A slow inhale. A steady exhale. His grip on reality realigned, the urgency still present, but his thoughts no longer tangled in the chaos. His gaze flickered between them once more, this time calmer, more measured. "I need to get to the city, quickly." His tone left no room for argument. "The three of you escort the rest. I won't assume the island is safe just yet." There was no need to explain further. Northern gave Byron a nod. The Sword King, ever composed, responded with a humble bow of his head. Without another word, Northern shifted Roma's limp form in his arms, securing her before lifting off the ground. His ascent was slow at first, controlled, deliberate, before he catapulted into the wind. And just like that, he was gone. The cohort of travelers remained, left standing with three strange figures, humans yet something far from normal. For some reason, three deranged and socially wounded beings were now their escort to Lithia. Northern's flight was short. He pierced the sky like a spear of wind, compressed, honed, unstoppable. The air bent around him, screaming in his wake, his body cutting through the atmosphere as if he were a hurricane made flesh. Less than 3 minutes. That was all it took before he was hovering over Lithia. And the city, it reeked of death. The air was thick, oppressive. The skyline loomed heavy with shadows of sorrow, as though the city itself was aware of the doom crawling toward it, waiting, dreading, powerless to change its fate. Northern barely spared it a glance. His focus was singular. The girl in his arms. And then, just for a moment he faltered. A flicker. Roma's words. They crawled back into his mind, unwelcome yet persistent, slithering through the cracks in his detachment. She had called his strength meaningless because he fought for nothing. To her, every life lost was a wound. It didn't matter if she knew the person. It didn't matter if she could have looked away. She refused to. Every flame snuffed out only fed the fire in her heart. She did not try to save people to be a hero. She saved them because she couldn't not. And Northern, detached, unbothered by the imminent death of an entire city, suddenly felt bad. Something inside him twisted, something foreign and unsettling. "I think I'm being infected." His lips curled in slight irritation at the thought. A disease. A very annoying disease. An immediate, almost primal urge coursed through Northern, the need to detach. To be rid of this girl. To cast her away. To put distance between himself and whatever was unsettling inside him. Yet, despite how fragile and helpless she seemed in this moment, she was anything but. Roma was full of strength. Even when things seemed impossible, when the odds stacked against her, when death loomed like an inevitable tide, she never gave up. Even now, he could imagine her dying with a smile. Not because she welcomed death, but because she would find fulfillment in it, because she would believe that dying to save a newborn child was worth it. Northern knew himself enough to call such things meaningless, stupid. And yet, why? Why did people like her find purpose in that? Why was it worth anything at all? More importantly, why did he care? Perhaps, on his journey to outgrow his past, to eclipse the foolishness of his former self, he had lost something along the way. Perhaps he had never paid attention to what mattered most. And right now, his only clue to reclaiming whatever that was, his only thread to understanding, was the dying girl in his hands. He mustn't let her die. Never. Taking a deep breath, Northern descended into the city. Chapter 795. Lithia, the Dead City. Northern landed gently on the narrow street, Roma cradled in his arms. The moment his feet touched the ground, the atmosphere twisted. People lurked in the shadows, their gaunt faces barely visible beneath the dim flicker of dying lanterns. Tension thickened like a suffocating fog. His sudden arrival rattled them, making them recoil deeper into the dark recesses like specters of the city's despair. Some stared in uncertainty, others trembled, gripped by an unspoken fear. No one had entered the city in months. A human descending from the sky. It was too bizarre, too unnatural for a place teetering on the brink of annihilation. Did I just make a scene? Northern scanned the haggard faces around him, perplexed by their reaction. Right now, he had no time for confusion. Roma needed help. Please. His voice carried through the still air, rolling with firm authority. Does anyone know of a healer? My friend needs help. His plea met silence. People shrank away, windows creaked shut, and eyes peeked fearfully from the narrow gaps of wooden slats. His words meant nothing to them. Fear and hopelessness had consumed their hearts long before he arrived. Northern sighed, stepping forward. His gaze swept the decayed cityscape. The rot had seeped deep. Without fresh imports, food had dwindled to scraps. Fishmongers stood before empty stalls, their last catches long gone. Salted meats had turned brittle. Fruits were a luxury only the privileged could afford. Please, I need a healer, do you? His words barely left his lips before they flinched and scattered, abandoning their posts as if he carried some unseen curse. A frown tugged at Northern's brow. What the hell is wrong with these people? They were hollowed-out husks, gaunt, starved, their faces carved by sleepless nights and the slow erosion of hope. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, but fear had already devoured their souls. Men and women who once bartered in silk and gold now scavenged through rubble for anything of value. Shopkeepers guarded their stores like fortresses, some demanding impossible prices for their final wares, others hoarding in silence, waiting for the moment when all order shattered. Children no longer played. Their laughter was a relic of a world before the blockade. Now, they clung to their mother's skirts, their eyes too hollow, too knowing for their age. Desperation festered like an open wound. Whispers of looters and thieves slithered through the alleyways, their desperation as sharp as the knives they clutched. Some betrayed their own for a slice of bread. Others clung to their last shred of honor with white-knuckled fists. The city's guards still patrolled, but their movements were sluggish, their eyes dull. Their once polished armor had lost its shine. Their weapons, meant to defend against horrors beyond the walls, now felt more like symbols of futility. Even they knew swords wouldn't save them. Hey! Northern's voice thundered through the narrow street, but no one flinched. No one turned. They just kept walking, their dull eyes locked forward, moving like lifeless husks. Northern grimaced, cutting across another street. Then, out of the shadows, someone emerged from an alleyway. Short, cloaked, face obscured. A low voice rasped through the air. "Oh aye, young man. You lookin' for a he?" Northern's eyes widened in pure shock. That voice, he knew it. How? The cloaked figure halted mid-sentence. Slowly, almost cautiously, he pulled back his hood. A weathered face peeked out, eyes squinting in disbelief. By all the lifeless stars, how in the hells is my employer here? Northern frowned. I should be asking you the same thing. What the hell are you doing? Wait. His gaze flickered around, realization dawning. This is a trade city. I guess it makes sense that you'd be here. He exhaled, his grip on Roma tightening. House studied him for a beat, lingering before he finally responded. We found a link here in Lithia, he said, voice edged with something unreadable. I've been here for the past 2 months, trying to secure a deal with him. I finally succeeded, then the blockade happened. The dwarf trader fell silent, his sharp eyes sweeping over the ruins of the city before settling back on Northern. Lithia's doom is ringing its final bell, Howe muttered. So no, not now, not here. Let's get you somewhere safer first. His gaze flickered toward the unconscious woman in Northern's arms. Come with me, employer. He turned, moving without another word. Northern followed, his steps steady but his mind in turmoil. Lithia hadn't fallen to the monsters. Not yet, but it might as well have. He wasn't sure how long Lithia had been cut off from the rest of the world. But the city didn't look like it needed fangs and claws to kill it. The blockade had done the job just fine. Even though the walls still stood, Lithia was already dead. Howe spoke as he led Northern away, his voice carrying its usual lilt of mischief. Oh dear. Is that woman a missing piece of your story? You wear worry like a shroud, and I've never seen you haunted before. Northern lingered on the words for a moment, then scoffed. Missing piece of my story? That's a poetic way to put it. Howe shrugged. Oh, I've been drinking deep from the trader's chalice, bartering, haggling, and mastering the fine art of taking without looking like a thief. And that clone? Stars above. He's evolving like a beast on the hunt. He's got more tricks than I do now. Employer, my gratitude could fill an auction hall. Ah, that's right. Northern's thoughts flickered back. I gave him a clone with my old life's memories. A small smile pulled at his lips as he nodded. I'm glad he's been of good help to you. Then, after a brief pause, his voice dropped lower, more urgent. Is there a healer around here? Anyone at all? Howe fell silent. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he kept walking, leading Northern toward a large, weathered building, Lithia's City Hall. Then his voice rang out. There is, employer, but I'm not sure if you'd like him. Northern's gaze sharpened. A pale, almost weary smile ghosted his lips as he narrowed his eyes slightly. Ha! And why wouldn't I? Whoever it is, I desperately need them right now. Howe didn't answer right away. There was something strange in his eyes. A flicker of unease, something unspoken pressing against the weight of his words. He reached the city hall and knocked twice. A dull thud against the thick wooden door. Then, with a deep exhale, he turned back to Northern, his expression wry. Wrangling my grudges took longer than I'd like to admit, he muttered. Turns out, even if I loathe the bastard, I can't ignore his usefulness. The weasel wriggled his way into necessity, and now I'm stuck tolerating his smug, resourceful hide. Howe winced in visible irritation, shaking his head as if ridding himself of a bad taste. And just as he did, the door creaked open.
Chapter 796. Ressource Full Rat.
The door creaked open slightly. A tall man with lean muscles and a notable goatee peered through the gap, his sharp gaze settling on Howe. He gave a curt nod before widening the door, allowing them entry. Howe returned the nod and led Northern inside the city hall. The place was alive with movement. Tables were scattered across the hall, groups huddled together in hushed conversations, their faces marred by a dark, gloomy resolve. Tension pressed against the walls, thick enough to choke. The city hall itself was a striking contrast to the atmosphere. An expansive, laminated structure bathed in the soft glow of white light from ornate lamps hanging from the ceiling. The walls, though built of brick, were draped in thick blue curtains tapered with gold edges and adorned with the city's insignia, a clear declaration of its role as a center of trade. It was surprisingly better than Northern had expected. Yet, even with daylight breaking into afternoon, the city beyond its walls remained swallowed in shadow. This place wasn't too far removed from the outside, but at the very least, it clung to an air of hope. The people here were different. That much was obvious. In fact, it didn't take much to piece together what had transpired. These people, these drifters, had received shelter, coverage, and privileges that the civilians outside had been denied. Northern had seen something like this before, once in the Dark Continent. Only there it had been on a far larger scale. The city had made its choice. Its resources would go to the drifters, the ones deemed capable of defending whatever was still worth saving. The civilians, the mundane humans, had been left what little was left. Whether the drifters accepted that decision or loathed, it was something buried deep in their hearts. unspoken but ever-present in their actions. But from what Northern was seeing now, they weren't enjoying any of it. Desperation clung to the air like mist, thick and suffocating. Every face he passed bore the same expression: gloom, horror, and the fading embers of hope. And yet, despite it all, they refused to crumble. That determination, that sheer unwillingness to surrender to despair, struck something deep within Northern. A strange light tore through his soul. Not something tangible, but a flicker of emotion so raw it nearly took his breath away. It wasn't dark amusement this time. It was awe. A reflection of the half-dead girl in his arms echoed in every one of these people. They moved with urgency, their faces worn and weary, their bodies strained beyond reason. Yet their eyes still carried fire. And strangely, he admired it. Hal lingered for a moment, studying Northern's face before speaking. Every soul is burning their last embers to keep this city from crumbling, patching up cracks with sweat and prayers. The walls are brittle bones, still hold, but the river? That liquid abyss is a gaping mouth, whispering doom we can't yet see. We're clinging to a fraying rope, and every tug weakens the knots. The tide ain't shifting in our favor. He clicked his tongue in distaste, his gaze flicking back to Northern. As for the healer, he stopped mid-sentence, eyes narrowing as he caught the swift shift in Northern's expression. It wasn't anger, but something else. An exhaustion laced with wariness, an unwelcoming stillness settling into his gaze. How? Northern's voice was quiet, but there was weight behind it. The healer you were talking about. Hal followed his line of sight, turning his head slowly, straight to the center of the hall. A young man with green hair was walking toward them. Is that him, Graham? Hal gave a slow, somber nod. He's a very resourceful rat, and the only person who can heal your missing piece. I suggest you don't. He froze. His breath caught in his throat as he saw Northern's expression smooth over. The weariness, the wariness, it was gone. What remained was a cold, impassive calm, as if none of it had been there to begin with. Hal muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. That's unexpected. I thought he'd be more immature with his emotions. Even for Hal, seeing Graham's rat-like face again was a test of restraint. The memories were still fresh, of that bastard using people, stealing from him, oppressing him whenever he had the chance. The resentment never faded. But reality didn't care for grievances. And accepting that reality, well, it had taken time. A long while. A while that wasn't immediate. Hal was past 40, old enough to expect a young boy like Northern to be reckless, to lash out. But surprisingly, the boy didn't. Graham reached them, his gait slow, his expression blank and utterly indifferent. His sharp, calculating eyes swept over Northern, but there was no recognition, no curiosity, no interest. Northern meant nothing to him. He was here for one reason. How? A twisted smile curled at his lips, practiced and insincere. Then he spoke. We'll be needing your boy's help again. There's been a change in the current. We suspect an attack in a few minutes. A dark grimace settled on Hal's face. He exhaled sharply, his expression hardening as he met Graham's gaze. Before that, I need your help, urgently. Graham arched a brow, his eyes flickering between Hal, the young man beside him, and the pale girl cradled in his arms. Then realization dawned. Oh, I see. Healing. For the first time, Graham fully regarded Northern, his gaze scanning him with detached curiosity. Then, with a slight tilt of his head, he spoke. Follow me. He took a step before pausing, his gaze shifting back to Hal. The payment will be that, won't it? Hal sighed, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He gave a single nod. Just make sure she lives. Graham rolled his eyes and turned away, his voice ringing out as he walked. Of course she will. Just send the boy over. Northern said nothing. He simply followed, Roma still in his arms. His eyes drifted across the hall, taking in the shifting energy around him. The moment Graham had spoken, the atmosphere had grown heavier. The air bristled with anticipation, thick with an unspoken tension. Weapons were being sharpened, the grind of steel against stone punctuating the room. Sparks of light flickered as people summoned various items, their hands moving with practiced urgency. A storm was coming. But Northern remained focused, trailing behind Braham as they turned a corner and entered a long, dimly lit room. The moment he stepped inside, the scent hit him. A pungent blend of sickness and something earthy, damp, almost like the forest after a heavy rain. But there was no one in sight. No patients. No healers. Only rows of wooden coffins, neatly arranged in the room. Coffins? Why coffins? Chapter 797. The Healer. Braham observed the look on Northern's face for a moment before his eyes widened. Oh, no, don't be mistaken, dear friend. These are extensions of my talent ability as a savant, he said with a grin. Thanks to me, these severely injured drifters can regain the fullness of their former selves and return to battle whole. As he spoke, he walked toward an empty space and crouched. Braham lingered for a few moments, staring at a flat slab of wood lying on the ground. Then, after a brief pause, he finally reached out and touched it. Immediately, the wood responded. It moved as though it had come to life, its brown surface stretching and reshaping until, at last, a coffin lay before him. Braham rose to his feet, turning his gaze toward Northern. He hesitated for a beat, then narrowed his eyes. "Do I know you?" Northern shook his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "I'm not sure you do. Not everyone was Annette. Besides, he had changed so much over the past few months, almost a year since their return. He had gone from having pale, lifeless skin to an alabaster complexion, and now an olive tone. Even though the black and blue hues of his hair were fading, it wasn't completely white. It didn't carry the pristine, almost ethereal whiteness. Northern did not expect anyone to recognize him, and that was a good thing. But some would, despite the changes. Just not Braham. They hadn't spent much time together, which made it all the more impressive that Braham even had a suspicion. What about Elliot, though? Isn't that bastard still walking around with my face? Northern doubted it. Though he had never explicitly warned how against it, Northern suspected the traitor had taken precautions to ensure his employer's face wasn't appearing everywhere. Braham stepped aside slightly, motioning to the newly formed coffin. "Anyway, put her here. With the wood encasing her, I'll be able to diagnose her condition and treat accordingly. But her recovery will take at least 24 hours, depending on the severity of her injuries." Northern moved forward and carefully laid Roma inside the wooden coffin. He didn't know if he could trust Braham, but at this moment, there wasn't much of a choice. And at least the rat of a man didn't know who he was yet, so there was no reason for him to act out of the ordinary. Even so, that logic was hard to swallow. Braham was a despicable existence, a betrayer to the core. What if he simply acted like himself? A clawed rage curled through Northern's chest, tearing at his lungs with every breath. He forced himself to calm down, steadying his storming thoughts. There was no other choice but to trust the healer. At that moment, Braham's voice boomed with shock. "What in the stars is this?" Northern looked at him, his eyes beaten by worry. What's wrong?" Braham gaped at him, then exploded. "What do you mean, what's wrong?" "The way her insides are ruptured. It's like a whirlpool tore through her body. Dude, it's a miracle she's still breathing." He slapped a hand over his gaping mouth, staring at the girl in pure shock. His eyes trembled as though struggling to process what he was seeing. "And she's not even a drifter? Stars above. How could you let this happen?" Northern remained silent, though Braham's words hit him with a pang of guilt, sharpening the rage already simmering inside him. The mundane girl had proven to be viciously stubborn. He exhaled a slow, measured breath and spoke. "Can you help her?" Braham paused for a moment. Then, slowly, a grin stretched across his face, one that made Northern uncomfortable. His gaze settled sharply on Northern. "Of course I can, young man, but this isn't just some measly injury." No one in the entire Central Plain can heal this except me. Northern stared at him, unimpressed. But he didn't think Braham was lying. Back in the Dark Continent, Braham had proven himself to be the most valuable and resourceful person in their group. And even now, Howe had encountered him as a traitor and had no choice but to acknowledge the man's resourcefulness. Something that probably wasn't even limited to his healing abilities. But Northern knew exactly where this was going. And that made him frown slightly. This will cost me, won't it? Braham mused, tapping his chin theatrically. Whatever Howe is offering me won't compensate for it. So, young man, what can you offer? Northern appreciated his bluntness. It was better this way. His eyes locked onto Braham's, unwavering. I can offer you money. That was the most he was willing to part with. Money solved things quickly.
No unnecessary attachments. No lingering ties.
And most importantly, it meant he could sever any connection to Braham as soon as possible. Because that was the only way to stop himself from one day making the mistake of killing the healer. But Braham, the damned guy, shook his head, resting his hands beneath his cheek, his eyes damp with thoughts for a fleeting moment. No, I don't accept money. Many people may value money above all else, but you see, I've had to learn the hard way that money is, in fact, the least valuable of all things. Northern raised a brow. What is this bastard saying? Not that he didn't understand Braham's point. Going around making people owe you was a clever way to accumulate riches, not just in wealth but in power. It was a form of currency that opened boundless possibilities for a single person. It was real value. Which was precisely why whatever Braham was saying, whatever he was leading up to, was beginning to disgust Northern. Braham's lips curled into a delighted smile as his gaze swept over Northern, sizing him up from the tip of his boots to the peak of his hair. The way he smiled, too pleased, too entertained, was both unsettling and infuriating. Northern's fingers clenched into a fist and trembled at his side. Braham was the reason why the last war between Sloria and Lothellowan had happened. The bastard had stabbed all of them in the back for his own gain, and even got away with it. Technically, Northern hadn't been part of their group in the same way, but the war had forced his hand. It had made him kill humans too. He didn't blame Braham for his actions. He just hated the rat for what he was. But right now, his care, the sheer urgency of seeing Roma healed, was far greater than his hatred for Braham. After a few more agonizing seconds, the healer finally spoke, still smiling. I find myself rather infatuated with the armor you're wearing right now. His voice was soft, almost playful. So, tell me, can I have it? Northern's expression darkened instantly. What? You want my armor? His voice was laced with quiet, burning disbelief. Chapter 798. Unlikely Exchange. Northern stood there, confused and irritated. His armor? For what? Right now, he was wearing the Molten Vein armor, the powerful piece he had obtained after slaying a dungeon monster of the same name. It was formidable, layered with seething energy that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. And Braham wanted him to hand it over, to heal Roma. That wasn't even considering whatever deal Braham had struck with Howe in the shadows, feeding off something Northern hadn't yet uncovered. Greed aside, why did Braham need his armor? That was the question Northern wrestled with in the fraction of a second. He stood there, utterly silent in surprise. Braham smiled. You seem quite baffled by my request. Is it impossible? Northern's gaze shifted to Roma's motionless body lying within the coffin. Her face was pallid, drained of all vitality, as though life had long since abandoned her. He paused, studying her with an impassive expression. Then, after a moment, he sighed. His eyes flicked back to Braham, and he slightly shook his head. No, not at all. Just give me a moment to part with it. Braham's smile widened as he watched Northern take a step back. A swirl of black sparks erupted around him, the molten vein armor dispersing in a dazzling whirlwind as if the very air was peeling it away. Northern lingered in place for a breath, head slightly bowed, whispering something inaudible. Spirit Linen, I want you to take the form of my armor, to the very letter. replicate its effects and strength. Can you do that? There was no verbal response, but he felt the mimic cloth's answer. A second later, Northern stepped forward, now stripped of molten vein, and passed it to Braham without hesitation. The healer wasted no time. Sparks swirled once more, consuming Braham as he summoned the armor onto himself. Northern watched, his expression unreadable. Spirit linen might not perfectly replicate the molten vein's orderability, but it could mimic something close. Braham wouldn't even know the difference. Besides, spirit linen had something even molten vein lacked, a flawless, imperceptible defense. And for whatever reason Braham wanted this armor, Northern had no intention of simply giving away such a prized possession. Instead, he would use this as an opportunity. Let spirit linen spy on Braham. One way or another, willingly or not, the mimic cloth would serve as his eyes. Yet that wasn't the only reason Northern accepted. Northern had an undeniable inclination to copy Braham's ability. It would have been simple, one command and he'd acquire it. But he didn't, because deep down he felt it would be useless. Healing was valuable, perhaps even vital, but not in the way Northern needed. It lacked the overwhelming offense or versatility he sought in his talents. So, rather than waste a slot on a power he deemed inferior, he had made a decision. Within the past few minutes inside the city hall, he had already scanned the talents of those around him, sifting through them like an unseen predator. Some were far more useful than Braham's nature-based healing talent. He was going to choose one of those instead. But that didn't mean he would erase his chances entirely. His ability to copy was limited. With only one slot left, his choices mattered more than anything. So he devised an alternative. Spirit linen would serve as his conduit. If an opportunity arose after he evolved and Braham's healing abilities proved to be something beyond what he expected, then and only then would he copy them, using spirit linen's surveillance as a secondary means. For now, he would bide his time. He had no interest in abandoning control. And more than that, he had no intention of trusting Braham. The armor looked just as it had on Northern, identical, seamless, unchanged. Or at the very least, no obvious difference. Braham's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he turned, admiring the way it fit him. His fingers ran along the plated sections, testing the weight, the feel of it. Then he whistled. "Oh, my forgotten days. It really is a heroic item. How'd you get your hands on something this rare?" Northern shrugged. "Had to defeat a really strong monster for it." Braham was still inspecting the armor, tracing its patterns with deliberate curiosity. But when Northern spoke, he paused. His expression shifted just slightly. A small dip in his smile, a faint shadow over his features. "Oh dear," he murmured, tilting his head. "It must have meant a lot to you. And yet, you gave it away for her." His gaze slid over to the coffin. His smile widened once more. This time it held something else, an understanding. Then he nodded, as if reaffirming something to himself. "Do not worry, my friend. I will make sure your girlfriend returns to you, as good as new." Northern seethed. "She's not my girlfriend." Braham blinked. "She's not." He paused. "Then your sister?" "No. She's not my sister." Braham tilted his head slightly, confusion flickering in his eyes. Then his expression shifted, a wince of mild disgust crossing his face. "Wait. The state she's in, that's not your doing, right?"
No. No.
Northern exhaled sharply. "It's not." A breath of silence. Then, quieter, his voice lowered. "She's a very good friend. I consider her that, at least, and she doesn't deserve to die." A shadow flickered across his features, a slight frown tugging at his brows. "If she dies, that would mean I failed to protect her." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "What am I strong for, if I can't protect even one single person?" Braham watched him, not with pity, not with sympathy, just observing. Then, with a slow shrug, he leaned back and said, "But you have to admit something as a drifter." Northern's eyes narrowed. Braham's smile didn't falter. "Being strong doesn't mean you can protect everyone. His voice was light, conversational, but something beneath it felt colder than before. In the end, we are all human, slaves to the selfishness of our own desires. His eyes gleamed faintly. We function differently. Some people put their desires last. Others, he tapped his chest, put themselves first. A chuckle. If there's room to accommodate more, then I do so with a price. Because humanity doesn't appreciate anything that comes for free. Northern stared at him, suppressing the emotions rising in his chest. However, that explains a lot about you. Graham's smile faltered. For the first time, a faint crease of a frown appeared on his face. Pardon. Northern didn't answer right away. Instead, his gaze drifted back to Roma. Then he let out a small, pale smile. So, will she be okay? Graham followed his gaze, looking down at the still, lifeless girl in the coffin. For a moment he said nothing. Then, in a quiet breath, "Oh, most definitely. She'll be more than fine." His voice was calm, assured. "She'll come to you in a day." Then, resting a hand on Northern's shoulder, he leaned in slightly. "You just hang around and stay safe, friend. This place might look secure, but we are expecting our doom at any moment. Could be a minute away. It could be 2 months away." A beat of silence. "So be careful around here." Northern held his gaze. Then, subtly, deliberately, he stepped back, removing Graham's hand from his shoulder. "Thank you." His tone was measured, neutral. Then, without another word, Northern turned and left, leaving behind the healer, leaving behind the coffin, and stepping out of that strange, suffocating room filled with the air of sickness and nature. Chapter 799. First Duel. Northern lingered by the hall, watching the steady churn of movement as people prepared for the incoming onslaught, or rather, engaged in battles that had already begun. He noted the absence of certain faces, those he had marked before. The heavy shadow of sullenness that hung over the bright interior of the city hall was almost tangible, denser now, suffocating. They looked like they were waiting for their turn. He wasn't entirely sure what was happening, and curiosity prickled at him, but approaching someone to ask felt unappealing. Maybe he was simply too reclusive to seek anyone out. Crap. I never thought I was this shy. Shaking off that thought, he refocused. There were more pressing matters, urgent, in fact. Today marked the first day of the combat duel, scheduled to span 3 days. So far, his clone had remained inactive all morning, but the time for battle was drawing close. Northern had initially wanted to participate himself, but he wasn't overly insistent. He trusted that the clone was more than capable of handling the fight. Leaning against the cool stone of the wall, he positioned himself in an alcove barely noticed, where the brilliance of the light failed to fully reach. It was an overlooked corner, drowned in the absence of attention, and no one, in their state of preparation, paid it any heed. Scattered across the hall, the few people present braced themselves for what was to come. Northern exhaled. His view shifted. A sprawling arena unfurled before him, a coliseum of vast magnitude, its seats teeming with countless figures. The collective roar of the crowd soared high, sharp as millions of arrows loosed into the sky. In the heart of the round structure, 2 combatants were locked in a vicious, deadly exchange. One wielded a silver stiletto, a blade so ethereal it seemed more an illusion than steel. His movements carried the whisper of absence rather than presence, slipping in and out of reach with the slipperiness of the wind itself, perhaps even more elusive. His opponent, however, was a stark contrast, a brute of raw, unrelenting strength, his physique an exquisite amalgamation of honed muscle and towering presence. Each swing of his axe was a declaration of power, his sinews rippling with terrifying precision. Even the wind seemed to yield, carving a path before him in reluctant obeisance. He was a conqueror, if not yet crowned, then certainly on the rise. His strikes thundered through the air, leaving little room for anything but retreat. The ghostly warrior danced away, weaving through openings with masterful footwork. He knew blocking a single one of those devastating blows would be his undoing. But evasion alone could not win this battle. And he had yet to devise a definitive way to turn the tide. From the way things stood, the advantage belonged to the axe-wielding brute. His relentless onslaught forced the ghostly fighter into a defensive rhythm, controlling the tempo, dictating the pace. The axe struck the ground, a beastly weapon cleaving into stone with a deafening crash. Fragments of shattered earth burst into the air, scattering like shrapnel. And in that moment the ghostly warrior vanished. The brute warrior stilled, his stance tightening, his gaze sharpening into something more primal. Every fiber of his body braced for the unseen. Seconds dragged. Nothing. Then his pupils constricted. He fell into the trap. Northern mused pitifully. As the axe carved through the air toward the left, a wicked grin split the brute warrior's face. To him, the battle's outcome was already sealed. But the moment his weapon cleaved through the space where his target should have been, something was wrong. A silver gleam, sharp and merciless, flashed not from the left, but from behind. The ghostly warrior materialized like smoke condensing into form, his stiletto already in motion, the perfect strike lined up against his opponent's exposed back. The brute's eyes widened for an instant, then realization struck. The target his axe had slashed through dissolved into white smoke. His instincts surged, honed and ruthless, reacting before thought could fully form. His body twisted, muscles coiling like iron springs. As his axe completed its arc, his elbow shot backward in a crude but brutally effective counter. The ghostly warrior reeled, his precise positioning shattered. For the first time, a flicker of genuine concern crossed his features. The feint had failed, and now he was closer to his opponent than ever before, dangerously so within the lethal range of that monstrous axe. Northern's lips curled. Impressive! He hadn't expected the brute to react that well. That level of instinctive combat sense. This wasn't just a drifter relying on his talent abilities. Earlier, as he studied the warrior's towering form, an observation had clicked into place. The man was unnecessarily large for a student. But Northern already knew why. It was his talent ability. The boy was actively using his second talent ability, likely his nomad ability. Northern wasn't certain how much soul essence the brute had left to spare, but if he failed to employ it carefully and judiciously, his defeat was inevitable. From the way he clashed with the ghostly fighter, there was no doubt. He fully believed victory was his to seize. But he had underestimated his opponent to the very last moment. Even so, the fact that he could still react with such precision spoke volumes. He wasn't just a brute swinging an axe. A trained combatant. Perhaps a noble. Northern found himself intrigued. The brute's battle style was relentless. A force that crashed forward like a mighty wave, unstoppable and crushing. His axe was the cutting edge of that wave, and his immense strength was the current that drove it with violent force. It was a brutal yet intelligently crafted combat style, tailored to his kind of talent and caliber. Perhaps it was because Northern had spent so much time fighting, or maybe it was due to Formless, now evolved into Omniform, but perceiving these nuances had suddenly become second nature. He first noticed it in the Tier 5 rift he entered recently. His overwhelming success in that rift owed much to the power of Titan's reckoning. But more importantly, it was easy because his mundane eyes and sharpened intuition had begun unraveling the combat styles of his enemies. The monster's attacks had been exactly as one would expect, rugged, animalistic, driven by raw instinct. Yet even in their chaotic rhythm, there was an underlying cadence, a pattern of movement. And once he recognized it, breaking through became effortless, especially with his terrifying strength. Then came the humanoid centipedes and those mangled monsters. And now, watching this battle, it was as clear as day. Omniform indeed had brought a great boon that he never paid attention to. Chapter 800, Demon of Emulation. Formless had always been Northern's strongest attribute. It was an ability rooted in neither conventional existence nor known frameworks, but in the state of his own soul and the anomaly that he was. Because of this, Northern had chosen to relegate it to the background, not because he couldn't build upon it, but because he intended it as a last resort. Even if he had never actively sought to shape his path around it, the thought had crossed his mind numerous times: what would happen if Nexus returned? If chaos and void tried to consume him? What if the fragile balance holding him together snapped? Formless and nameless were his anchors. Since his very progress, his every achievement was bound to the system, Northern had avoided relying on them. Because should he lose everything, he had no doubt that these two would remain. And if he had built himself once, he could do it again. They were his blank slate, his foundation and tandem of limitless possibilities. Formless had two abilities, one passive, one active. The passive one earned him the title Demon of Change. Northern didn't fully understand what that meant, but he suspected it had shaped his very being. His ever-evolving body, his insatiable hunger to grow, the relentless drive to become more. Of course, experience played a part. 2 lifetimes of struggle, but deep down, something in him thrived on it. Rather than relying on wit and cunning to win, he preferred brute strength. He welcomed defeat, even sought it, because he believed that every loss was a step toward greater change. It was an unnatural philosophy for someone who once clung to life with desperation. Surely, Demon of Change was at work. The active ability was Demon of Emulation. He had used it twice in the Dark Continent. Once against Hao, and once against his former tenant in the mansion, the devilish corpse eater who had since risen to become a commander among his soul summons. Yet despite its power, Northern had deliberately held himself back from using it. Because he feared that the ability would lead him toward breakthroughs the system would recognize. And that was precisely what he was trying to avoid. But even as he ignored them, the system itself seemed determined to weave formless and nameless deeper into his being, evolving them, embedding them into his very progression. One such instance was formless infusion into his heritage ability, and him absorbing true names of some monsters even though he did not expect to. For this reason he stopped trying to dig deeper into the essence of his true name. He felt that unlocking it would become an anchor, a foundation so strong that it could propel him toward a new level of existence. All of these things, his abilities, his evolution, Northern would only begin exploring when he deemed it safe enough, or if he encountered threats beyond his current and future repertoire of talents. But ever since that strange encounter with Josie, everything had shifted. Both Formless and Nameless had ascended to new heights. Now he could assume other people's names, and Formless had evolved into Omniform. Meanwhile, Demon of Emulation, which once merely allowed him to mirror anything as long as he perceived its true essence, had grown into something far more profound. Now, perceiving the true essence of things was as effortless as breathing. All he had to do was focus, which meant it was now possible for Northern to mirror any combat style, and perhaps, in the future, even abilities without needing to copy them. Yet the idea of achieving this without the system seemed almost non-existent. Perhaps, even if it was possible, he might not retain those abilities permanently. Either way, this new heightened perception was why Northern had suddenly become so adept at unraveling combat styles. Their form, their philosophy, their underlying intent. The brute warrior wasn't just relying on raw strength. His movements, though appearing straightforward, were layered with calculated precision. Every swing of his axe wasn't simply meant to overpower his opponent. It was designed to control space, to dictate the flow of battle like a tsunami. A force that built gradually, rising in stages, before ultimately crashing down with undeniable force. But for now, he was still at the stage of a juvenile wave, his force not yet fully matured. Northern sensed that this was because of his current experience level. Even so, the subtle shifts of his feet before each strike, the precise tension in his muscles, betraying years of brutal training hidden beneath the facade of brute strength. He had endured excruciating drills, honed himself into a combatant beyond his years, achieving a mastery that most warriors would take a lifetime to attain. Yet Northern had done the same. Only his battlefield had been different. He had forged himself alone, in the depths of monster-infested lands, with nothing but his mind and raw willpower, a razor-sharp determination to survive. Through Demon of Emulation, Northern didn't just see the surface. He perceived the philosophy behind every movement. The brute warrior's belief in offense as the best defense. A doctrine where true strength wasn't measured in individual powerful strikes, but in the creation of an unrelenting rhythm. A force so absolute, it left opponents with no choice but to follow its tempo. And then there was the ghost-like fighter, a stark contrast. His movements weren't about evasion for evasion's sake. Every dodge was a calculation. Every retreat was a lure. He fought like a ghost moving through water, slipping between gaps, flowing around obstacles. Not merely avoiding strikes, but eroding his opponent's very foundation. With Omniform, Northern could have perfectly replicated either combat style. But that wasn't the point. The true value lay not in mimicry, but in understanding, in seeing how different fighters had found their own answers to the eternal questions of combat. A ghostly water against a mighty wave. On the surface, the wave was bound to crush the water beneath its sheer force. But the water... If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.